Chapter 270. Several rays of light with astonishing momentum swept across Kuanzhong City, startling countless cultivators and making them raise their heads to look at them. This is the aura of a core formation cultivator. A cultivator muttered to himself as he looked at the colorful streaks of light converging in the sky. 1, 2, 3, 4. There were actually 7 core formation cultivators gathered together, causing the low-level cultivators to be both envious and shocked. In the restaurant, someone bared his teeth and spat on the ground. Baring his teeth, he looked at the flying sleeves and the dazzling lights in the sky and shouted, "Damn it! I wish I could be as awesome as you." The cultivators at the table next to him turned to look at him. He was just a strong man in the 4th layer of the aura refining realm. His clothes were ordinary, and his cultivation level was even more ordinary. The cultivators at the table mocked him. "You? Why don't you look at what kind of aptitude you have?" Each and every one of these core formation seniors is a heavenly genius. When they were your age, they'd already reached the foundation establishment stage. The muscular man rolled his eyes. He didn't want to argue with this person and said confidently, "I was just joking. Core formation? I'll thank the heavens and earth if I can reach the foundation establishment stage." These words resonated with most of the low-level cultivators in the restaurant. Most of them were just itinerant cultivators. Let alone core formation, they couldn't even reach foundation establishment. "Sigh, when will I be able to form my gold core too?" The group of cultivators looked at the ray of light in mid-air with envy. Fellow Taoist Shoujing, fellow Taoist Qingwei. In mid-air, Taoist Kumu greeted them, who were the last to arrive. All 7 of them had arrived. Qin swept his gaze over them, then returned the greeting. Fellow Taoist Kumu, fellow Taoists. Taoist Kumu and Tong Tianyin smiled and cupped their hands. Madame Feng was treading on a lotus leaf-shaped flying magic tool, ignoring them. Jing Xingji looked at them with a faint smile. Lei Dongqing was still holding his wine jar. He said anxiously, "You two are so slow. We've been waiting for a long time. Let's go, let's go." "Fellow Taoist Lei, what's the rush?" Taoist Kumu said with a smile. "It takes half a year to a year for the restrictions on Demonic Mountain to slowly weaken and disappear. It's only been 2 or 3 months since we got the news. When we arrive at Demonic Mountain, we still have to wait." "That's hard to say," Lei Dongqing said. "What if it was opened earlier? You'll just be following behind others and picking up scraps." Old Lei is right. Madame Feng's gaze was cold, completely different from her flirtatious appearance that day. "When we reach Demonic Mountain, we still have a lot of things to do. Let's go." Both of them were in such a hurry, and the others didn't have any objections, so Taoist Camus said, "In that case, let's go." The 7 cultivators used their own methods to form a formation and flew toward the east. Taoist Kumu was riding a red-crowned crane. Tong Tianyin's flying magic weapon was like a canoe. Madame Feng was stepping on a lotus leaf, and Lei Dongqing was sitting on top of a wine jar. Mo Tinga couldn't help but get goosebumps all over her body when she recalled that he held a wine jar and drank from it every day. Jing Xingji was naturally riding a flying sword, while she was riding a flying cloud. She didn't ride she's flying cloud like she did when she came here. Instead, she took out the white silk handkerchief and used it as a flying magic weapon. Among the 7 of them, she's flying cloud, Jing Xingji's flying sword, and Tong Tianyin's canoe were the fastest. Mo Tinga could keep up with them fairly easily, but the others weren't weak either. Although they were just hurrying, it was also a way to evaluate each other. Madame Feng was a bit surprised to see Mo Tinga easily keeping up with everyone, so she took a second look at her. Fellow Taoist Qingwei. Sitting in the canoe, Tong Tianyin was the most relaxed, so he came over to talk to Mo Tinga. Mo Tinga tilted her head to look at him. "Fellow Taoist Tong, what's the matter?" Tong Tianyin said, "I've already asked about that matter. My friend said that since we're going to Demonic Mountain, he hopes fellow Taoist Qingwei can exchange a mystical object from Demonic Mountain for it." Mo Tinga was a bit stunned. "What does that mean?" Tong Tianyin smiled and said, "To tell you the truth, fellow Taoist Qingwei, my friend is also like me. He doesn't have much time left in his life, and because of his clan, it's inconvenient for him to go to Demonic Mountain with us. He bought the chalcedony to concoct medicinal pills, but it's not that he absolutely needs it. There's a unique spiritual object on Demonic Mountain that's very useful to him. If fellow Taoist Qingwei's lucky and can get that spiritual object, my old friend is willing to exchange it for a chalcedony. Mo Tinga paused for a moment, then said, "Fellow Taoist Tong, this transaction isn't fair. Which spiritual object on Demonic Mountain isn't extremely rare? Although chalcedonies older than 1,000 years are rare, their value is far from comparable. Besides, after entering Demonic Mountain, it's really too difficult to get a specific spiritual item." Tong Tianyin stroked his beard with a smile and said, "The value of an object depends on its demand. If it's needed, it's worth it no matter how big the price is. Fellow Taoist Qingwei, you understand this principle, right?" Mo Tinga naturally understood this. Otherwise, she wouldn't have asked the steward's hall to buy those materials at sky-high prices. But understanding was one thing. She naturally couldn't let herself suffer too much during the transaction. Fellow Taoist Tong is right, but I wonder how much your friend needs this spiritual object. This. Tong Tianyin paused for a moment, then shook his head with a smile. Fellow Taoist Qingwei, with your Xianxing school's wealth, why do you need to compete with individual cultivators like us for petty profits? Rest assured, the spiritual object my friend mentioned isn't too difficult to find. In terms of value, it's a bit higher than 1,000-year-old chalcedony, but if fellow Taoist urgently needs chalcedonies, it won't be too much of a loss. Mo Tinga thought for a moment, then chose to take a step back. All right, fellow Taoist Tong, tell me what you're looking for first. If I happen to find it on this trip, I'll submit the transaction. If I can't find it, I can only drop the subject. Tong Tianyin nodded. That's good. I'll be able to give an explanation to my old friend. The two of them then continued to hurry on with their journey, exchanging a few words from time to time. Because the two of them were using secret voice transmissions, the others didn't know what they were talking about. Only Jing Xingji glanced at them with a smile. Mo Tinga saw that his face was like a peach blossom and his eyes had a soul-stirring look, so she felt disgusted and turned her head to ignore him. Jing Xingji, however, wasn't annoyed. He still showed a faint smile, then turned his head to follow Taoist Kumu. The next few days were boring journeys. There were often cultivators flying at high speed like them in the sky. Lower-level cultivators all avoided them when they saw so many core formation cultivators. When they occasionally ran into cultivators in the same realm as them, they couldn't help but greet them, but they still went their separate ways. Compared to foundation building and aura refining cultivators, core formation cultivators were obviously much more indifferent, or perhaps they were much more arrogant. Those who could cultivate to the core formation realm were either extremely talented or had great fated chances. Which one of them didn't look down on ordinary cultivators? Those with higher statuses were elders of large sections. Those with lower statuses were doing very well, even in small sections. If they were vagrant cultivators, they were even more impressive. Vagrant cultivators who were able to cultivate to the core formation realm were all outstanding. However, in these past few days, Mo Tinga got along well with Taoist Kumu and Tong Tianyin. Even Madame Feng, who probably didn't find her so displeasing to the eye anymore, would occasionally say a few words to her. Mo Tinga, who originally cut the queue halfway, gradually blended into this small core formation team. But when they were taking a break, she secretly pulled her back. Junior Marshall's sister Qingwei. These past few days, Mo Tinga had adapted to the way he called her. If he called her Tinga, it meant he was in a good mood. If he called her Junior Marshall's sister Qingwei, it meant he wanted to distance himself from her. Mo Tinga thought about it and felt very helpless. Why was this senior marshal brother, Shoujing, even more unhappy than her after the truth was revealed? With his mental state and cultivation level, he shouldn't be like this, right? Mo Tinga's eyes wandered, but she didn't answer. She frowned and called her again. Junior Marshal Sister Qingwei? He slightly raised his voice, startling Mo Tinga back to her senses. Mo Tinga was a bit annoyed when she realized she was distracted. This wasn't a good habit for cultivators. Senior Marshal Brother Shoujing, what's the matter? Qinshi glanced at her and said faintly, Junior Marshall's sister. You seem to have a good relationship with them these days? Them? Taoist Kumu and the others? Mo Tinga said, we were just chatting. What's wrong with that? Nothing. I just want to tell you that you'd better keep your distance from them. And Mo Tinga was puzzled. Since we're companions, shouldn't we communicate more? I don't know them at all. If we don't communicate, it'll be hard for us to have a tacit understanding. Qinshi raised the corner of his mouth somewhat mockingly. If it was in the past, it wouldn't be a big deal. But do you remember what happened before we left? That old Tong exchanged a 10,000-year-old spiritual plant from you? Mo Tinga nodded. Yes, what's wrong with that? Of course, it's very problematic. Qinshi said faintly. A 10,000-year-old spiritual plant isn't something ordinary core formation cultivators can afford. With Kuinzhong City's strength, there's no nascent soul cultivator behind them. If they had a 10,000-year-old spiritual plant, they'd be bullied by nascent soul cultivators sooner or later. That day at the trade fair, Old Tong directly said he wanted to exchange for a 10,000-year-old spiritual plant, so this matter must have been leaked. The core formation cultivators of the Individual Cultivator Alliance in Kuinzhong City are all shrewd. How could they make this kind of mistake? Moreover, he exchanged for a 10,000-year-old spiritual plant and went to Demonic Mountain with us. It's impossible for him to concoct a 10,000-year-old spiritual plant into medicinal pills in such a short time. Mo Tinga thought for a moment and was a bit surprised. Then what's fellow Taoist Tong's purpose in exchanging for a 10,000-year-old spiritual plant? I don't know. She shook his head and asked her, did he and Taoist Kumu talk to you about anything these past few days? Nothing. Mo Tinga thought carefully. It's nothing more than some miscellaneous things in Kunwu. It seems there's nothing special. Right, the two of them seemed very confident about the trip to Demonic Mountain. She smiled, but his gaze was even more determined. That's right. A 10,000-year-old spiritual plant isn't used to concoct medicinal pills. It's not used to concoct medicinal pills? Mo Tinga was a bit confused. Then what else can it be used for? To give gifts. Gifts? Mo Tinga thought for a moment and understood. To a nascent soul cultivator? She nodded. It's very likely. After a pause, he said slowly, maybe in the beginning, they didn't think they could get a 10,000-year-old spiritual plant. Maybe they just wanted to use those crystal soul jades to exchange for something from a nascent soul cultivator. Although crystal soul jades aren't as rare as 10,000-year-old spiritual plants, collecting so many of them isn't much easier than finding 10,000-year-old spiritual plants. I'm afraid Old Tong didn't collect them by himself. Instead, he gathered the strength of Kuinzhong City. Then what's their purpose? Maybe they wanted to exchange for something. She frowned. He thought for a while and shook his head. In the end, it's just my guess. I don't have any solid evidence. You just need to be more careful on the way. And Mo Tinga answered. She thought to herself that as a core formation cultivator, she really had a lot of things to learn. She deduced such a possibility based on a few clues. Regardless of whether it was true or not, at least he could raise his vigilance and avoid some dangers. Chapter 271. Right. Mo Tinga thought for a moment, then said, Tong Tinyan said his friend wanted me to exchange a spiritual object I might find on Demonic Mountain for a 1,000-year-old chalcedony. A spiritual object on Demonic Mountain? Unsurprisingly, a mocking expression also appeared on Qinshi's face. Their plan is very clever. How dangerous is it to go to Demonic Mountain? It's merely a 1,000-year-old chalcedony, yet they want to obtain what they want through your hands? Mo Tinga said, they're not the only ones who have 1,000-year-old chalcedony. It's fine to wait. However, the most important thing right now is the trip to Demonic Mountain, so I won't bargain with them. If we can really get that spiritual object and come back safely, it won't be too late to discuss this matter. If we're unlucky, she didn't continue. Demonic Mountain was a dangerous place, not to mention the place where her father died. Even if she went there once and was fully prepared this time, it still wasn't foolproof. She frowned and said coldly, since I'm taking you there, I'll naturally bring you back safely. You don't need to worry. Mo Tinga was rendered speechless by his words. She didn't mean that. So why did he? Just as she thought about it, she heard Qinshi say, "What do they want?" Mo Tienga collected her scattered thoughts and said, "It's something called heavenly aromatic bean." Tong Tianyan said it's originally a kind of spiritual panacea. Its fruit looks like a bean, but after it ripens, it'll break away from its roots and leaves, becoming extremely hard like a stone. This kind of thing rarely appears in the world, but a lot of them were found on Demonic Mountain. Qinshi frowned and didn't say anything for a long time. Judging from his expression, there seemed to be something wrong. So Mo Tinga asked, "What's wrong?" After a long while, Qinshi finally said, "I'm afraid Old Tong's friend cultivates some kind of side path. Heavenly aromatic bean really isn't precious and has no use for ordinary cultivators. If we can find it, it won't be too bad to exchange it for 1,000-year-old chalcedony. But the use of heavenly aromatic bean is—" He hesitated for a long time, but didn't say it, as if there was something difficult to say. Mo Tinga didn't understand, so she asked again, "What use does it have?" Qinshi turned his head and said as calmly as he could, "Heavenly aromatic beans can be used to concoct a kind of medicinal pill. It has a miraculous effect on people performing dual cultivation." Mo Tinga thought about it and felt even more baffled. But there's nothing special about it, right? The Tao of alchemy was filled with all sorts of oddities. There were pill recipes for every situation. Cultivators who practiced dual cultivation would naturally have pills suitable for them. Faced with her doubtful gaze, she looked even more distressed. After a long time, he finally squeezed out a few words. "This isn't an ordinary medicinal pill. It's an aphrodisiac. Fellow Taoist Shoujing, fellow Taoist Qingwei." Taoist Kumu's voice rang out from afar, breaking the strange silence. The two of them raised their heads and saw Taoist Kumu waving at them. "It's time for us to go." The two of them felt as if they had been pardoned. They each controlled their flying treasures and approached the group. Although she knew she should pretend nothing had happened, she still couldn't help but put some distance between them. After several days of getting along, Madame Feng treated Mo Tienga a bit more kindly. Seeing her like this, she felt a bit strange and asked, "What happened?" Mo Tienga was speechless for a moment, but when she saw Jing Xingji glancing at her with a faint smile on his face, she felt even more depressed. She could only answer gloomily, "It's nothing. I just heard my master has arrived at Mount Yuang, so I'm a bit anxious." Madame Feng didn't doubt her words. She felt a bit envious and said, "Sister, with your talent and your current age, there seems to be no need for you to risk your life on Demonic Mountain, right? Why do you three have to go?" Mo Tienga was silent for a while, then said, "I'm going to Demonic Mountain to settle an old matter." "Old matter?" Madame Feng was about to ask again, but she saw Mo Tienga turning her head away. She seemed to be full of worries, so she didn't say anything. Seeing that the two of them seemed to be much closer, Lei Dongqing shouted loudly, "Woman Feng, didn't you dislike this little girl? How come it's only been a few days, but you're already so good?" Seeing that it was him, Madame Feng snorted coldly and said, "No matter how much I dislike others, they're still better than you. Go to the side, you're annoying." Lei Dongqing touched his nose, but he only muttered, "Fierce woman." Mo Tienga couldn't help but purse her lips and smile. These two people were quite interesting. Madame Feng obviously wasn't old. She looked to be in her early 20s, and she was a bright and beautiful woman. But this Lei Dongqing called her Woman Feng. Although Lei Dongqing was a bald man and looked a bit ugly, he looked like he was in his 30s, but Madame Feng insisted on calling him Old Lei. However, as she thought about this, Mo Tienga also had some doubts. These two people seemed to be different from other people. Was there some kind of relationship between them? Just as she was about to send a secret message to Qin Shi, she remembered what happened just now and swallowed her words. If there was some kind of relationship between them, Qin Shi should have told her long ago. Since he didn't say anything, that meant there was no relationship, right? Mo Tienga shook her head, threw this matter to the back of her mind, and continued on their journey in silence. The flying speed of core formation cultivators was originally fast. After several days, They were already close to the boundary of Mount Yuheng. There were more and more cultivators flying in the sky. Among them, there were many high-level cultivators, and occasionally, there were even nascent soul cultivators passing by. This time, the weakening of demonic mountains restrictions could be said to have shocked most of the cultivators in the Celestial Pole. Cultivators who were stuck in bottlenecks and lacked fated chances rushed over one after another. Even those who cultivated smoothly were also hesitant. After all, the path to immortality was difficult. If they could obtain some fated chances, it might be better than cultivating painstakingly for several hundred years. Even aura refining and foundation building cultivators were restless. They naturally didn't dare to go deep into Demonic Mountain, but they might also find some treasures in the periphery of Demonic Mountain. If they were lucky, they might be able to benefit from it for the rest of their lives, and they might even become high-level cultivators in one go. Tiandao sect was known as the #1 sect in the Celestial Pole, so there were originally many cultivators gathered around it. At this time, it was even more bustling. However, as core formation cultivators, Imo Tianga's group didn't need to wander around Mount Yuheng like ordinary cultivators. They had to look for their own lodgings because Tiandao's sect would receive them. Mount Yuheng was closely connected to Demonic Mountain, so if they wanted to go to Demonic Mountain, they had to pass through Mount Yuheng. The entire Mount Yuheng belonged to Tiandao's sect, so if they wanted to go to Demonic Mountain, they had to pass through Tiandao's sect. Demonic Mountain had enormous wealth, but it also had dangers in the world. Tiandao's sect naturally didn't dare to monopolize it, but taking advantage of the opportunity to make money was inevitable. Every cultivator who entered had to pay a fee to borrow the path. This fee wasn't too much, and it wasn't even worth mentioning for core formation cultivators. However, they had a lot of people, so every time Demonic Mountain opened, Tiandao's sect would make a huge windfall. In addition, there were also many people peddling maps and notes about Demonic Mountain in the small town at the foot of Mount Yuheng. The prices were very high, but there was an endless stream of people buying them. Imo Tiange originally thought it was interesting and wanted to buy one to take a look, but Qin stopped her. He said, "These things are useless. Most of them are incomplete and only have things on the periphery. The place of good is much deeper, so these things aren't involved at all." Imo Tiange thought he was right, so she gave up. With the things Lord Daoist Jinghe brought, why would they still need to buy from these peddlers? Some of these peddlers were even mortals, so it was obvious they wouldn't have anything too good. Under Daoist Kumu's lead, the 7 of them went up Mount Yuheng. Fellow Daoist Kumu, fellow Daoist Tong, fellow Daoist Shoujing. As soon as they arrived at Tiandao's sect's gate, a core formation cultivator greeted them with a smile. "Fellow Daoists, you've arrived really early." Imo Tiange looked at him. This was a Tiandao sect cultivator about 30 years old, and his cultivation level was in the middle stage of the core formation realm. Judging from the way he greeted Daoist Kumu and the others, they seemed to be familiar with each other. Everyone returned the greeting. Lei Dongxing was the only one who looked very gloomy since they arrived at Mount Yuheng. Imo Tiange recalled Qin. She once said Lei Dongxing was originally a cultivator from Tiandao's sect. It was only because he offended someone that he was pushed out of the sect. Judging from his expression now, he indeed harbored great resentment towards Tiandao's sect. Besides, since he was a Tiandao sect cultivator and had a core formation cultivation level, he must be an elder. How could he not have an immortal's cave on Mount Yuheng? In this situation, this cultivator treated her like an ordinary cultivator, but he didn't mention it, as if he had nothing to do with Tiandao's sect. "Oh, this is..." The cultivator looked at Imo Tiange and asked in surprise. "Qin," she said, "fellow Daoist Ji, this is my junior martial sister. Her Daoist name is Qingwei." "Oh, so this is the famous master Daoist Qingwei. It's an honor to meet you." The core formation cultivator named Ji Feng greeted her with a smile. His tone was full of amazement. "Fellow Daoist Ji, you're too polite." Imo Tiange returned the greeting. Ji Feng didn't seem to be polite. His tone was very enthusiastic. "Fellow Daoist Qingwei's name has spread throughout Kunwu, but I'm not being polite." Xianqing School has produced genius cultivators again and again. It really makes us envious. Mo Tiange smiled, but she just cupped her hands and didn't say much. Seeing that she didn't like to talk much, Ji Feng didn't say much. He said with a smile, "Fellow Taoists came from afar, so you must be tired. Please take a rest first." Although the 7 of them weren't physically tired, they also felt mentally tired after traveling in silence for several days, so none of them objected. Ji Feng handed them over to the 2 aura refining cultivators who were in charge of receiving guests. The 2 aura refining cultivators then led them into the mountain gate. The group of people didn't walk far before they arrived at a huge courtyard. Mo Tiange scanned the courtyard with her divine sense. There were indeed a lot of core formation cultivators in the courtyard. She estimated there were at least 30 to 40 of them. There were about 2 or 3 months left before Demonic Mountain opened, and it was unknown how many people would come later. Once they entered the courtyard, another cultivator immediately came to greet them. "Seniors, you've come from afar. Welcome, welcome." Then he very attentively led them to their respective residences. This courtyard was very large, and each small courtyard had several rooms. 2 small courtyards for the 7 of them were enough. After Mo Tiange settled down in a room, that cultivator didn't retreat. He just stood at the door and watched. For a moment, Mo Tiange didn't understand what they were doing. It was only when she heard other cultivators thanking her for the reward from the room to her left that she understood. She then took out a small bag of spirit stones and threw it over. That cultivator was only in the aura refining realm. When he touched the bag of spirit stones, he felt there were at least 100 spirit stones inside. He was so happy that he repeatedly thanked her. "Thank you, Senior, for your reward." "Thank you, Senior." Mo Tiange shook her head as she watched that cultivator retreat. Since he was a core formation cultivator, she naturally had to be a bit more generous. Coupled with the fees for borrowing the way, Tiandao sect really made a huge profit. Chapter 272. In fact, Mo Tiange missed out on one benefit. After they settled down, she once again sent her a summoning talisman, telling her to go to the market square at the foot of the mountain. The 2 of them lived in the same courtyard and were in adjacent rooms, yet they insisted on using summoning talismans to send messages. This made Mo Tiange rather speechless. Even if he didn't knock on the door, he could just use a private message. When she arrived at the market square and saw the bustling crowd and the cultivators going in and out of the shops, Mo Tiange finally remembered that when it came to profits, this was the real deal. With so many cultivators, Tiandao Sect shop will be able to do a lot of business in the near future. Even the other small shops would benefit from it. Both of them were core formation cultivators. Although high-grade cultivators from the Heavenly Tao Sect have been coming and going recently, walking on the street like this still attracted a lot of attention. The low-level cultivators only looked at them from afar with envy and jealousy in their eyes. "Senior brother Shoujing, where are we going?" Although Mo Tiange had slowly gotten used to this scene, she wasn't a genius who had been the center of everyone's attention since the beginning. She was happy and content in this kind of situation, but she felt very uncomfortable. She said, "Deal." Mo Tiange was stunned. "What does Senior Marshal brother want to buy?" She didn't answer. With his hands clasped behind his back, he continued to walk forward. Mo Tiange was already used to his temperament of not answering if he didn't want to, so she didn't say anything and just followed him silently. After a while, the 2 of them entered a shop. Mo Tiange raised her head to take a look. What a coincidence! This shop was the 100 Herbs Hall, the shop she came to buy a concocting furnace and materials the first time she came to Tiandao Sect. More than 60 years had passed since then, and the old aura refining man who sold her the concocting furnace had probably passed away a long time ago. Thinking back to that time, things really remained the same, but people had changed. At that time, second uncle hadn't died, and she was still just a little aura refining cultivator. No one on Mount Yuheng cared about her at all. Right now, she was already a core formation cultivator. Everyone treated her with respect, but second uncle would never come back. As soon as they entered 100 Herb Hall, a shop assistant immediately came forward and greeted them respectfully. "Welcome, seniors. Is there anything this junior can help you with?" She didn't answer. He only said, "I'm looking for Hu Zonghai." Upon hearing this, a surprised expression appeared on the shop assistant's face, but he immediately said, "Please take a seat inside. This junior will immediately report to you. May I know your name?" "My surname is Qin." The waiter led them to a side room and went to report. Mo Tienga was filled with questions. The old man she met here 60 years ago was a member of the Hu family. Thinking about it, this herb hall was most likely managed by the Hu family. If that was the case, then this Hu Zonghai was undoubtedly a member of the Hu family. Qin, she clearly said he was looking for Hu Zonghai. Could it be his old friend? This wasn't strange at all. Master had once said that apart from cultivating in seclusion, this senior martial brother also spent a lot of time outside. Presumably, he had gotten to know many strange people with different identities. Not long after, the door to the room was pushed open, and a middle-aged man dressed in luxurious clothes walked in. As soon as he entered, he saw Qin and very enthusiastically greeted him. He laughed and said loudly, "Brother Qin, it's really you. I haven't seen you in years. How are you?" What astonished Mo Tienga was that this person was only in the foundation building realm. Upon seeing this person, Qin stood up to return the greeting. Compared to this person's warm attitude, he was much calmer, but he didn't seem rude. "Thank you for your concern, Brother Hu. How have you been?" The two of them clearly had different levels of cultivation, but they were peers. After exchanging a few pleasantries, the man's gaze fell on Mo Tienga. "This is Qin," she said. "This is my junior martial sister. Her Taoist name is Qingwei." "Oh, so it's Master Taoist Qingwei." The man suddenly realized and very politely saluted. "I'm Hu Zonghai." "Greetings, Master Taoist Qingwei." Hu Zonghai was only a foundation-building cultivator. Under normal circumstances, core formation cultivators didn't need to return the greeting. However, Qin was her senior martial brother after all, and they treated each other as peers, so Mo Tienga couldn't put on airs. She stood up and raised her hand. "Greetings, fellow Taoist Hu." I don't dare, Hu Zonghai said repeatedly. "Master Taoist Qingwei, please sit, please sit." After the greeting, Hu Zonghai very enthusiastically asked someone to serve them tea again and invited them to Hu clan as guests. Qin she declined, and Hu Zonghai didn't insist, so the two of them began a chat. In the end, the gap between their cultivation levels was too big. Although Hu Zonghai spoke to Qin as peers, his words were very polite. The topics they talked about were also ordinary. Nothing more than some ordinary things, news about the weakening of restrictions on Demonic Mountain this time, and some cultivation problems. Mo Tienga just listened in silence. From their conversation, she roughly understood their relationship. When she met Hu Zonghai, Qin, she was only a foundation-building cultivator. They went through trials and tribulations together, so they were now friends of the same generation. Qin, she was almost 200 years old now. For core formation cultivators, he was very young, but for foundation-building cultivators, he was middle-aged. In a few decades, he would enter old age. Hu Zonghai was actually the same age as him, but because of the gap in their cultivation levels, he looked much older than him. The two of them talked for a while. Hu Zonghai asked, "Brother Qin, you came to Tiandao sect by asking someone to pass a message. Now that you've come in person, is there something important?" The two of them seemed to have a good relationship, but they weren't close friends. Qin she came to visit them as soon as he came, and he even brought someone else with him. Obviously, he had another purpose. Qin she smiled and said bluntly, "Brother Hu is right. I came to visit you today because I need your help." "Oh." Hu Zonghai's expression was sincere. He smiled and said, "Based on our many years of friendship, Brother Qin, if you have something to say, just say it. As long as I can do it, I definitely won't refuse." Mo Tienga couldn't tell whether this was polite or not. This Hu Zonghai was obviously different from cultivators like them. His words were forthright, but he was also slippery and experienced. He must be someone who is very good at dealing with people. Qin she only had a slight smile on his face. He said, "It's not a big deal. I just want to ask Brother Hu about two spiritual objects. Mo Tianga's heart skipped a beat. She couldn't help but look at Qin Shi, who Zonghai was surprised. Oh, Brother Qin, are you looking for some kind of natural treasure? Even with Qin School's connections, you still couldn't find it? Qin Shi smiled. Since I can't find it, it must be something extremely difficult to find. Hu Zonghai laughed. You're right. Brother Qin, tell me about it. Although my cultivation level isn't high enough, I'm good at finding people and things. Maybe I've heard of it. Qin, she said bluntly. I'm looking for two things. One is 1,000-year-old chalcedony, and the other is Qiyun stone. Brother Hu, have you heard of them recently? Mo Tiange lowered her head. Sure enough, he was looking for those two things. About that, Hu Zonghai pondered for a while. Brother Qin is indeed looking for rare things. 1,000-year-old chalcedony is fine since I've heard of it occasionally, but Qiyun stone, if I didn't manage the shop for the sect all year round, I'm afraid I wouldn't know what it is. However, I manage Hunter Herb's Hall, and Qiyun stone is a material for refining tools, so I have to ask around. Qin, she said, if Brother Hu can tell me where it is, I'll be very grateful. Hu Zonghai smiled. It's nothing. It's nothing. Brother Qin, I can't guarantee anything about Qiyun stone, but there seems to be news about 1,000-year-old chalcedony a few days ago. If you don't mind, can you wait for me to inquire about it? That'll be great. Thank you, Brother Hu. The two of them chatted for a while before Qin Shi took his leave. Hu Zonghai saw the two of them out, asked where they were staying, and told them that he would inform them if he had any news in 3 days at most. After saying goodbye to Hu Zonghai, the two of them went back in silence. Qin Shi didn't say anything, and Mo Tiange also lowered her head, her mind wandering. The monastery of a big cultivation group was naturally very high. From the foot of the mountain, there were thousands of jade steps that extended all the way to the clouds. Under normal circumstances, only aura-refining disciples who couldn't fly would climb these jade steps. After they built their foundation, they could only fly. Mo Tiange didn't know what Qin Shi was thinking. He didn't use a flying magic weapon and just walked step by step. However, Mo Tiange was preoccupied, so she just followed him with her head lowered and didn't think about this. As they walked, the person in front of them suddenly stopped. Mo Tiange bumped into him, causing her nose to turn red. If it weren't for the spiritual aura protecting her body, she might have had a nosebleed. Qin Shi turned around and stared at her with a frown. What are you thinking about? Why did you bump into him like this? Mo Tiange looked embarrassed. Not to mention a core formation cultivator like her. Even a small aura-refining cultivator who had just entered the path of immortality wouldn't stupidly bump into someone else's back. It was clear that she was completely distracted just now. She clearly bumped into him, but she didn't react in time. Fortunately, Qin Shi didn't ask her about it seriously. After saying that, he continued walking. Mo Tiange touched her nose and continued to follow him. Staring at the back of the person in front of her, she suddenly felt like she had returned to the time when she was in Yunwu's sect. At that time, she didn't spend much time with Senior Marshal Brother Qin, but every time they met, it was more or less the same. He would spontaneously walk in front of her, and she would just follow him. In the blink of an eye, more than 60 years had passed. The two of them were no longer the small cultivators from back then. Their statuses were as different as heaven and earth, but the situation they got along with each other was still the same. At that time, they each had their own secrets. When they entered Yunwu's sect, they called each other Senior Marshal Brother and a Junior Marshal Brother, but kept a distance from each other. Now, they were real martial brothers and sisters, but they still kept their distance. Although they trusted each other, they didn't open their hearts to each other. In fact, whether it was Senior Marshal Brother Qin or Senior Marshal Brother Shoujing, both of them treated her extremely well. Senior Marshal Brother Qin was cold, but he always cared about their relationship as fellow disciples. As for Senior Marshal Brother Shoujing, he seemed indifferent, but if she thought about it carefully, her smooth journey might have been because he paved the way in front of her. Just like now. She only mentioned it once, but he always remembered that the first thing he had to do after arriving at Tiandao sect was to inquire about information for her. It would be a lie to say she didn't feel grateful, but she had never been an outgoing person. Even if she felt grateful, she would only keep it in her heart. Senior Marshal Brother Shojing. She suddenly stopped. She seemed to answer her carelessly. He took several steps forward, but when he realized she wasn't following him, he stopped and turned around. He saw her standing about 5 or 6 steps away from him. Her head was lowered, so he couldn't see her expression clearly. After a while, she finally said, "Thank you." It was a sentence without any head or tail, but he understood it. After a moment of silence, he said with an indifferent expression, "It was nothing. No need to mention it again." Her head was still lowered, but she didn't answer. He also didn't say anything. After a long time, Mo Tinga finally said, "But, Senior Marshal Brother, please don't treat me so well in the future." Chin. She suddenly turned around and walked up 2 steps. He then stopped and said coldly, "What are you worried about?" Mo Tinga didn't say anything. He turned his head, glanced at her, and sneered. "Or do you think I'm greedy for something?" Without waiting for her answer, he waved his long sleeve and summoned his flying cloud. In a flash, he flew up the jade steps and went straight to Mount Yuheng. He didn't wait for her even for a moment. Mo Tinga was left behind. She stared at his back and swallowed back the words no. She just wanted to say that he shouldn't treat her so well. If he treated her so well that she would overthink things, it wasn't what he thought. Chapter 273. 3 days later, as expected, Hu Zhonghai sent a message. But at that time, Mo Tinga was cultivating, so he left after seeing Qin Shi. After Hu Zhonghai left, Qin Shi sent her a summoning talisman, saying there was no hope on this side. The last time the Qian stone appeared on Mount Yuheng was several hundred years ago. Its whereabouts were unknown, so it had probably been used long ago. The 1,000-year-old chalcedony did appear several years ago, but unfortunately, when Hu Zhonghai found the person who bought it, that person stubbornly refused to sell it no matter what conditions Hu Zhonghai proposed. Although Hu Zhonghai was only a foundation-building cultivator, he was a member of the number 1 cultivation clan in Tiandao sect. This was Tiandao sect, but that person was unwilling to give him face. Even if Qin Shi went there himself, he probably wouldn't have a chance. Mo Tinga was a bit disappointed when she heard this, but she soon cheered up. Even if she couldn't get it here, there was still hope in Kuanzhong City. Since this heavenly aromatic bean wasn't rare, even if she couldn't get it, someone else would. When she left Demonic Mountain, she could exchange or buy it with that person. No one could say for sure how long it would take for the restrictions on Demonic Mountain to disappear. But according to previous experience, the earliest would be 2 months, and the latest might be more than half a year. After about a month, the restrictions would slowly become stronger until they couldn't enter or leave. In order to enter Demonic Mountain, as soon as the restrictions disappeared, more and more people came to Mount Yuheng. Fortunately, core formation cultivators were very proud, so they couldn't be bothered. As time passed, the restrictions on Demonic Mountain became weaker and weaker. These core formation cultivators finally couldn't sit still anymore. Every day, more and more people went out to inquire about the situation, and the originally quiet courtyard became more and more noisy. In the end, Mo Tinga stopped cultivating and only meditated for a while every day. She was either concocting pills or refining magic weapons to increase her strength when she entered Demonic Mountain. One day, 2 months later, they suddenly received news that the restrictions on Demonic Mountain would disappear the day after tomorrow. This news immediately spread throughout Mount Yuheng. All the cultivators rushed to the back of Mount Yuheng, scrambling to occupy a good position so they could enter Demonic Mountain as soon as possible. Their team also began to move. Core formation cultivators always received preferential treatment. Unlike foundation building and aura refining cultivators, they didn't have to accept Tiandao sect control. Instead, they had someone to lead the way. Very soon, they arrived at the border between Mount Yuheng and Demonic Mountain. The flattest place leading to Demonic Mountain was a valley. Knowing that Mo Tinga had never been here before, Taoist Kumu explained the place to her in detail. The restrictions here would be at their weakest, so it was the safest entrance. Mo Tinga had already read about these things in the jade slips Lord Taoist Jinghe gave her. However, Taoist Kumu had personal experience, so she might be able to gain something else from listening to him talk about it. Looking up, the small valley was now densely packed with cultivators. Core formation cultivators like them naturally occupied the best spots. Mo Tinga swept her gaze around. There were at least 100 core formation cultivators both near and far. There were still more than 1,000 core formation cultivators in the celestial pole, so there weren't too many of them. The foundation building cultivators and aura refining cultivators rested about 1,000 feet away from the core formation cultivators. Judging by the number of people, there were at least 10 times their number. Seeing that her gaze fell on these low-level cultivators, Tong Tianyin shook his head and sighed. I wonder how many of these people will survive. Alas! Mo Tinga's gaze flickered. Demonic Mountain was a dangerous place. Even core formation cultivators like them couldn't protect themselves, let alone those foundation building and aura refining cultivators. Every time Demonic Mountain opened, countless cultivators would pour in, but less than half of them could survive. Most of those who died were low-level cultivators. Mo Tinga looked around, but didn't see any nascent soul cultivators. She also couldn't sense any with her divine sense. Mo Tinga couldn't help but whisper to Qin Shi, senior martial brother, why aren't there any nascent soul cultivators? Where's Master? Has he arrived yet? Qin, she was meditating with his eyes closed. He didn't open his eyes when he heard what she said. After a while, he also whispered to her, Master arrived a long time ago. We don't care about nascent soul cultivators. We just need to wait patiently. Mo Tinga thought he was right. Master was usually unreliable, but he was never careless when it came to proper business. Presumably, he was waiting somewhere else. Time passed bit by bit. In the beginning, with so many people gathered, they could still hear the continuous chatter. In the end, everyone could feel the restriction weakening. Their gazes were fixed on the other side of the valley, where it connected to Demonic Mountain, but the valley with thousands of people was completely silent. The golden crow and the jade rabbit rose and fell again. A day passed. On the afternoon of the second day, they finally saw the light, curtain-like restriction on the other side of the valley slowly dim until it disappeared. Once again, a buzzing sound rang out in the valley. Then the crowd began to flock together. It was extremely chaotic. Fortunately, the core formation cultivators, were at the forefront. They naturally wouldn't lose control like these low-level cultivators. At this time, the first person to enter the valley wasn't a core formation cultivator. Instead, several flight lights suddenly appeared in the sky, carrying incomparable momentum. Mo Tinga's heart trembled. Such momentum, they must be nascent soul cultivators without a doubt. Sure enough, these cultivators soon landed at the place where the restriction disappeared. They were indeed several nascent soul cultivators. These nascent soul cultivators didn't say anything. They each stepped forward, slowly entered the restriction, and their figures soon disappeared. The core formation cultivators still didn't move, because these nascent soul cultivators were flying into Demonic Mountain one after another. Mo Tinga finally saw Lord Taoist Jinghe's figure. Lord Taoist Jinghe, a male cultivator wrapped in black from head to toe, a bald cultivator, and Lord Taoist Huayan didn't look at them and also entered. There weren't many nascent soul cultivators who entered Demonic Mountain this time. Mo Tinga counted about 20 people. However, there were only about 100 core formation cultivators. Compared to them, nascent soul cultivators were considered a lot. This wasn't strange. In the current cultivation world, deification was only a legend. None of the great late-stage nascent soul cultivators in the celestial pole had ever seen a deification cultivator. Most of these nascent soul cultivators were stuck in the early stage and couldn't make any progress. Except for those who had a long lifespan and were unwilling to give up, most of them had given up on advancing to the next realm. Because of this, as soon as Demonic Mountain appeared, those nascent soul cultivators who didn't have much lifespan left or were trapped in a realm with no hope of advancing didn't want to give up this opportunity. In any case, the possibility of them advancing to the next realm was very small, and they'd cultivated to the peak of the current cultivation world. So why wouldn't they take the risk? However, core formation cultivators rarely thought this way. They were already high-level cultivators, and most of them had high statuses. Those who had hopes of advancing to the nascent soul realm wouldn't rashly enter Demonic Mountain. Mo, Tinga, and Qin, she were only anomalies. Among the more than 100 core formation cultivators in front of them, only a few of them could be found. When all the nascent soul cultivators entered Demonic Mountain, some core formation cultivators finally couldn't hold back and took the lead to enter. Mo Tinga's small team squeezed into the crowd and entered Demonic Mountain at a time, neither too early nor too late. As soon as they passed the place where the restriction originally existed, Mo Tinga felt her vision blurred, and the scene in front of her was already very different. There were no jagged rocks like she imagined, and there was also no dusky fog like she imagined. Instead, there was a field of green. It was as if they were still on Mount Yuheng, surrounded by immortal aura and pressing spiritual aura. Mo Tinga looked back and found that the place where the two mountains met was a bit strange. When they were in the valley, the restriction disappeared, and they saw Demonic Mountain was also dusky, so she mistakenly thought Demonic Mountain should be dark. Now that they were on Demonic Mountain, looking at the entrance to Mount Yuheng, there was obviously nothing blocking their line of sight, but they couldn't see the scene outside. They could only see people continuously appearing at the entrance, as if it was a transporting formation. Fellow Taoists. Among them, the others were somewhat indifferent, so the role of the leader had always been played by Taoist Kumu. Now that they entered Demonic Mountain, it was also Taoist Kumu who took the lead to say, "We've already discussed the route. Let's go according to the original plan, okay?" Everyone nodded without any objections. Before entering Demonic Mountain, they had 2 months to gather information and discuss a plan. Mo Tinga originally didn't know much about this, so she didn't intervene. In any case, Qin, she was trustworthy. He didn't say no, so presumably there wouldn't be any problems. The place they wanted to go wasn't very dangerous. After all, among them, except for Taoist Kumu and Tong Tianyun, the others still had several hundred years left in their lifespans, so they really didn't need to take any big risks. However, they also had an agreement. During the 1-month period when the restriction disappeared, they had half a month to move around freely. If they wanted to go to a place that was too dangerous, the others could only follow them if they wanted. Those who didn't want to follow them would wait at the original place. If they didn't go back when the time was up, they could only pray for their own luck. Unlike foundation building and aura refining cultivators, most core formation cultivators didn't like to move in groups. They had a lot of experience and were much more selfish by nature. They often calculated risks and benefits very clearly, and they rarely sacrificed anything for others, even if it was their companions. Mo Tinga naturally didn't have any objections. Her purpose in entering the valley was different from others. Others wanted natural treasures, but she wanted corpses. Qin, she knew where her father's corpse was. Recently, she occasionally heard Qin, she mention that he once found some kind of unusual treasure in that dangerous place, but it wasn't convenient for him to retrieve it. This time, he came to Demonic Mountain with the intention of retrieving that unusual treasure. In that case, the two of them had to leave the group. After all, Qin, she wouldn't tell them about the unusual treasure, and the others also had other goals and wouldn't take risks with them. The group of 7 people followed Taoist Kumu's instructions and slowly walked forward. In the beginning, the scenery of Demonic Mountain wasn't much different from Mount Yuheng, but gradually, the verdant color faded a lot. It became more and more desolate and dusky. There were barriers and restrictions everywhere in the air. The spiritual aura turbulence was fierce, and gales blew from time to time. If one was unlucky and ran into 1 or 2 of them, one could easily be decapitated. They hadn't gone far when they heard several screams. Mo Tinga turned around to look at them. She realized they were foundation building and aura refining cultivators. Many of them had never entered Demonic Mountain before. They only heard about the rumors and bought 1 or 2 maps and information about Demonic Mountain at the foot of Mount Yuheng. Then, relying on a burst of motivation, they entered Demonic Mountain. These people didn't have enough strength, experience, or vigilance. As soon as they entered Demonic Mountain, they would easily run into those floating restrictions and die instantly. What made Mo Tienga feel between laughter and tears was that there was actually a little girl among them. Her companions were blown away by the gales, but she was so scared that she actually cried and shouted that she wanted to go back, making the others frown. No matter what happened outside, once you entered Demonic Mountain, you couldn't control your own life. Even if you died instantly, no one would sympathize with you. Chapter 274. There was no sun in the sky. There was only a hazy white light. Taoist Kumu said that on Demonic Mountain, spiritual aura and devil aura covered the sky, so sunlight couldn't shine in. This light was actually the light formed by the intertwining of spiritual aura and devil aura. Therefore, there was no day or night on Demonic Mountain. It was always like this, and time couldn't be distinguished. In the air, the gales became fiercer, and the remaining restrictions became stronger. There were many corpses on the ground. Most of their clothes were torn, but some were still intact. Upon closer inspection, the intact clothes were all spirit tools or magic tools. These corpses had no flesh, and only dry bones were left. The color of the bones was very white and even a little transparent, so they hadn't been dead for a long time. Maybe they were the cultivators who died here the last time Demonic Mountain opened. They didn't have chinko bags with them. Things like chinko bags wouldn't rot even after thousands of years, so they must have been taken away by others. Taoist Kumu stopped, looked around, and asked Tong Tunyan, "Was this the place we came last time?" Mo Tienga looked around. There were rocks everywhere, and some weeds grew in the middle. She really couldn't see any difference from the scene just now. Tong Tianyan was probably the same. After looking for a while, he said, "I can't tell." Everyone took out their maps and looked for the location according to the map. Taoist Kumu said that gales would blow from time to time on Demonic Mountain, so leaving a mark was useless. They could only slowly find the location based on memory. Mo Tienga looked around. Qinshi's expression was very gloomy, and he was frowning while looking into the distance. She felt a little uncertain. Although Qinshi might not answer, she still asked in a low voice, "Senior Marshal Brother Shojing, what's wrong?" Qinshi didn't answer for a long time. After a long time, he looked away from the distance and said faintly, "This time, I'm afraid the restrictions on Demonic Mountain are unstable." Mo Tienga was stunned and looked at the place he was looking at. Qinshi continued to say, "Look at the sky. If the spiritual aura and devil aura reached a balance, there wouldn't be lightning all the time." She looked into the distance. At the end of her line of sight, there was an extremely bright white light that flashed from time to time, looking like lightning. They didn't use secret messages, so the others all heard them. Kumu and Tong Tanyin also raised their heads and looked over, their faces turning more and more serious. After watching for a while, Taoist Kumu exhaled and said, "Fellow Taoist Shojing is right. Last time, we were already in a very dangerous situation. This time, it doesn't look like it's going to be easy. If a big restriction is unstable and collapses, we may all be buried inside." He spoke so seriously that no one else had a smile on their faces. Even Jing Xingji put away his frivolity and said, "Can it be more dangerous than last time?" Tong Tianyan smiled. "We managed to retreat in time last time, but what about this time? It's very difficult for us to encounter the disappearance of Demonic Mountain's restrictions again. Presumably, you won't give up this opportunity, right?" Jing Xingji didn't speak. His face was gloomy as he raised his head to look at the lightning on the distant horizon. Then, his gaze circled around them. His first glance was obviously to assess their strength, so the first person he eliminated was Mo Tienga. Then, his gaze lightly swept over Madame Feng and lay Donqing before finally stopping on Qin Shi, Taoist Kumu, and Tong Tianyan. The first person he looked at was Qin Shi, but when his gaze fell on Mo Tienga next to him, he let out an almost inaudible sigh. Then he looked at the two Taoists, but in the end, he shook his head as if he had given up. Jing Xingji withdrew his gaze and shifted his line of sight to Mo Tienga, who was staring at him intently. At first, a hint of surprise flashed across his face, but soon he smiled and winked at her with his peach blossom eyes. Imo Tinga ignored his flirtatious gesture and withdrew her gaze. Their group of 7 was very interesting. Jing Xingji's slight gesture just now was obviously to look for collaborators, but unfortunately, he got nothing in the end. Imo Tinga wasn't strong enough, and Madame Feng and Lei Dongqing might not be suitable because of their incompatible personalities. As for Qin Shi bringing Imo Tinga, he also eliminated them. But she was very surprised that Jing Xingji eliminated Daoist Kumu and Tong Tianyun. Taking everything into account, Daoist Kumu and Tong Tianyun had both strength and experience, so they should be the most suitable candidates. Why did Jing Xingji end up like that? Although her experience in dealing with matters couldn't compare to Daoist Kumu and the others, Imo Tinga had been speculating about people's minds since she was a child, and she had also seen a lot of people. Even if her conjecture wasn't completely correct, it shouldn't be too far off. Besides, although Jing Xingji was a bit scheming, he wasn't to the point where he couldn't see through anything. Not to mention Jing Xingji, Madame Feng, and Lei Dongqing became silent after they entered Demonic Mountain. Although they didn't spend much time together, Imo Tinga also felt something was a bit unusual. Could it be that their previous experience was too terrifying? That wasn't impossible. Based on what Qin Shi said, it was fortunate that they retreated early last time. Otherwise, they would have also been buried on Demonic Mountain. Since the matter was very important, it was natural for them to look serious. The last 2 people were Daoist Kumu and Tong Tianyun. These 2 people were very strange. According to Qin Shi, they might have been exchanging 10,000-year-old spiritual plants with some nascent soul cultivator, and the timing was right before Demonic Mountain. Based on that, it was very likely they were preparing for this trip. Of course, this was just their guess. Imo Tinga also didn't dare to confirm the possibility. The only thing she could be sure of was that these 5 people weren't simple. When they met up with these people in Kuanzhong City, Qin Shi once said that these people's characters were generally trustworthy, but their characters were a bit strange. Apart from their characters were generally trustworthy. In other words, without the inducement of great benefits, these people were trustworthy companions. But if there were great benefits, it was also very possible for them to turn hostile. Thinking up to this point, she cautiously looked at everyone, carefully sizing up their expressions and movements. During this period of time, they had already discussed their next move. No matter where they were going in the end, they had to go to the mountainside of Demonic Mountain in the end. Core formation and nascent soul cultivators had to go above the mountainside to look for treasures. They had already discussed the route and so on. Now that it was settled, the 7 people set off again. Demonic Mountain was extremely high, and the sky was full of restrictions and spiritual aura traps. In such an environment, flying was obviously impractical, so no matter what cultivation level cultivators were at, they had to move forward cautiously. Demonic Mountain was ridiculously huge, and the scenery was of no value as a reference. Before long, they couldn't see other people around them. They could only vaguely feel the spiritual aura fluctuations of other cultivators at the edge of their divine senses. "Wait," Tong Tianyun suddenly said. The group stopped and looked at him. He closed his eyes as if he was spreading his divine sense. Upon seeing this, Imo Tinga also focused her attention and frowned. Qin Shi saw the change in her expression and asked in a low voice, "What's wrong?" Imo Tinga didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked at Tong Tianyun, who had already opened his eyes. Tong Tianyun said, "There's a very strong spiritual aura fluctuation nearby. I don't know if it's because of the birth of a unique treasure or because the restrictions were broken." Spiritual aura was the foundation of cultivation and fights of magical powers for cultivators. Whether it was restrictions or unique treasures, they couldn't be separated from spiritual aura. Restrictions were extremely dangerous, and unique treasures were their biggest goals in entering Demonic Mountain. One was heaven, and the other was earth. It all depended on their choice. In an instant, everyone made a choice, and no one flinched. Since they entered Demonic Mountain, this was the biggest fated chance they were looking for. So how could they be unwilling to take risks? Tong Tianyun wasn't surprised. He identified the direction and said, "This way." This time, they weren't just walking, they were flying close to the ground. When encountering this kind of situation, it was naturally a competition to see who was faster. If they walked slowly and let others take the lead, it wouldn't be worth it. Once they entered Demonic Mountain, Emo Tienga no longer hid her strength. She held the white silk handkerchief in her hand and flew in the air. Her cloud-treading boots weren't slower than them at all, which made Taoist Kumu look at her in surprise. Senior Martial Brother Shojing. Emo Tienga's whisper entered Qin Shi's ears, so he also whispered back, "What's wrong? Did you find something?" Emo Tienga was a bit uncertain. She said, "The spiritual aura over there is very unstable. It seems like there are many strands." Qin Shi was stunned. He took another look at her and nodded softly. "I see. Pay more attention." Although Tong Tianyun's divine sense was the most powerful among them, Qin Shi was a peak stage core formation cultivator after all, so he wasn't much weaker than Tong Tianyun. He also sensed the spiritual aura just now, but he didn't sense it as clearly as Emo Tienga did. This was no longer a matter of the strength of the divine sense, but a matter of the subtle control of the divine sense. The soul-refining art was indeed powerful. Although the early stage of the core formation realm and the peak stage of the core formation realm were both in the core formation realm, there was a huge difference in their strengths. However, Emo Tienga had just formed her gold core, yet her divine sense was even better than his in the subtle aspects. The group of people moved forward at an extremely fast speed. All of a sudden, they heard a soft chi sound, followed by Madame Feng's cry. The 6 people stopped and looked at her. Madame Feng covered her arm, which was already dripping with blood. She said with a pale face, "We hit a drifting restriction." The others understood. There were big restrictions and small ones. The big ones were like lightning on the horizon, while the small ones were like specks of dust and were very difficult to see. However, these kinds of drifting, small restrictions were very rare. Madame Feng was really unlucky. Fortunately, she only suffered a minor injury. Lei Dongqing took out a jade bottle from his robe and threw it to her. "Bear with it for a while. We don't have much time. We have to hurry." Madame Feng nodded, opened the jade bottle, and applied the powdery substance on her wound. She then threw the jade bottle back to Lei Dongqing, took out a medicinal pill, swallowed it, and straightened her clothes. "Let's go." Since it was an adventure, there was no difference between men and women. The others also didn't have the heart to be protective of the fairer sex, so they immediately hurried on their way. They soon covered the distance of several hundred miles. When they saw what was lying on the ground, astonishment flashed across their eyes. It was actually a boat. It wasn't the small flying boat Tong Tianyun had, but an extremely gorgeous decorated pleasure boat with carved railings and painted rafters. This decorated pleasure boat was already very dilapidated and had lost its bright luster, but it was still in good condition. The turbulent spiritual aura came from inside the boat. The 7 people stopped in front of the boat. None of them went forward. They all knew what kind of place Demonic Mountain was. This was a battlefield, so how could there be a boat here? After watching for a while, Taoist Kumu said with a frown, "Fellow Taoists, can you see what this is?" Chapter 275. "This is a ship." Lei Dongqing blurted out a silly sentence. Madame Feng rolled her eyes at him and said, "Do I need you to tell me that?" Lei Dongqing probably also felt stupid, so he touched his bald head and didn't refute. Qin Shi stared at it for a while and suddenly said, "This is a magic weapon." She took a closer look. This gaily painted pleasure boat was made of special materials and was full of spiritual aura. Wasn't it a magic weapon? But the materials used to make such a big magic weapon were very rare. How many spirit stones would it cost? It's worthy of being a magic weapon of ancient cultivators. Jing Xingji murmured. This was exactly what everyone else was thinking. Taoist Kumu said, "This magic weapon. How can we take it?" Qin, she shook his head. "We can't." Everyone's gaze fell on him. Such a powerful magic weapon must be very powerful. Anyone who saw it would inevitably be greedy, but he actually said he couldn't take it. Qin eyes were calm. He glanced at them and said expressionlessly, "Think about it. How much effort would it take to take such a magic weapon? It would be enough time for nascent soul cultivators to find this place." They all looked pensive. Madame Feng said, "Qin Shoujing, are you telling us to give up?" "We have to." She said resolutely. "Let's not talk about whether we can get it or not. Even if we get it, it won't attract the attention of nascent soul cultivators. What about the core formation cultivators nearby? Can you avoid them completely? Don't forget our real purpose. It's not worthwhile to waste too much time here." Madame Feng looked at it and said reluctantly, "Our ultimate goal is nothing more than to get some benefits, whether it's spiritual objects or spiritual treasures. If we can get this magic weapon, why do we need to take risks?" She shook his head. "Suit yourself. I won't take it anyway. If you want it, I won't interfere." Taoist Kumu and the others looked hesitant. They all knew this magic weapon was really amazing, and it was very likely that there were other treasures inside. But what she said was reasonable. They had known Qin for a long time and knew he meant what he said. If he said he didn't want it now, he really didn't want it. But to put down this magic treasure, it was really, upon seeing their expressions, Qin said faintly, "Since that's the case, Junior Marshall's sister and I will take our leave first. We'll wait for you at Crouching Cloud Ridge. You can come back after you've finished your business." Once he finished speaking, he glanced at Mo Tienga, then turned into a flight light and flew close to the ground. Without any hesitation, Mo Tienga followed closely behind him. Once he left, the others hesitated. After a long while, Lei Dongqing asked, "Fellow Taoist Kumu, what do you think?" After pondering for a while, Taoist Kumu finally made up his mind. "It wasn't easy for us to come here, so let's give it a try. If it doesn't work, then we'll retreat." Tong Tianya nodded. "That's right. This magic treasure is too amazing. If we let it go, we would have come here for nothing. Besides, Qin Shoujing has always been cautious, and he doesn't lack magic weapons. We're different." She only slowed down after flying for dozens of miles. After a moment of hesitation, Mo Tienga followed him and walked side by side. "Senior Marshal Brother Shoujing, you really don't want that magic treasure?" She shook his head. "That thing is too big. Let's not talk about how to get it back. It's just a magic treasure after all. Even if we get it, how can we divide it?" Mo Tienga was stunned. "It's not impossible. I feel a lot of spiritual aura, so it's very likely that there are several kinds of magic treasures on the boat. Even so, we don't need to take risks," she said. "There are restrictions around that magic treasure, and they can't be broken in a short time. If we stay here for too long, there will definitely be conflicts. The place we're going to is very dangerous, so it's important to preserve our strength." Mo Tienga thought about it and felt what he said seemed reasonable, so she didn't say anything else. And as they spoke, the two of them had already flown hundreds of miles away. There was no flat ground, only a slope. She stopped and put away the flying cloud. He pondered for a moment, then raised his left hand. A dazzling golden light flashed on his arm, and the three-yang real fire appeared in his hand. He didn't hold it. Instead, he waved his hand, and the sword turned into a red light, scattering in front of the two of them. Although she had long guessed his identity, she rarely saw him use magic. The only time she saw him was when he fought with Jing Xingji, and he stopped as soon as the fight started. Qin's current technique wasn't strange, but she could see that his magic power was very pure. It was more difficult to transform things into aura than to transform them into objects. Mo Tienga didn't know to what extent he had refined his natal magic treasure to be able to use it as if it were his own arm. Mo Tienga secretly memorized the technique he used. These were all areas she needed to learn. With the spiritual aura transformed from the three-yang real fire sword around them, their journey forward was much safer. At least they wouldn't be hurt by the tiny restrictions like Madame Feng. And Mo Tienga suddenly felt something was wrong and asked, "Senior Marshal Brother, why haven't we seen any demonic beasts?" She paused for a moment, then said, Demonic Mountains terrain is strange, so there aren't many demonic beasts that can survive there. You should pray you don't run into any. If you do, it'll probably be a bitter battle. So that's how it is. As they walked past a gentle slope, the gales suddenly became fierce. Ordinary foundation building cultivators couldn't come up here. The two of them strengthened their protective, spiritual auras before they continued forward. Suddenly, Qinshi's eyes flashed, and he looked around vigilantly. After getting along with him for a while, Emo Tienga was very confident in his sense of danger. Upon seeing his expression, she immediately released the white silk handkerchief, making it float around her and holding several magic weapons in her hands. You're right. Qin, she pursed his lips. There are demonic beasts around. Emo Tienga wasn't too surprised. She used her divine sense to observe her surroundings. Sure enough, she found faint spiritual aura fluctuations approaching. Demonic beasts that could survive in such gales were obviously no small matter. Emo Tienga didn't dare to be careless and looked around vigilantly. The spiritual aura fluctuations became stronger. Qinshi raised his arm, and the red light converged, condensing into the three-yong real fire sword again, floating around him. Then he brandished the sword aura. Woo! A beast's roar came from the wind. Sensing the approaching spiritual aura fluctuations, Emo Tienga turned around and was shocked. This demonic beast had 4 feet on the ground, and its whole body was gray. Its eyes were like a wolf's, but it also had a leopard's body. Its teeth were shining with white light, and its claws were sharp. What was especially surprising was that it had a pair of tiny wings on its back. They were so tiny that she felt it couldn't fly at all. This is a Fengsheng beast. Qinshi stood in front of her. The three-yong real fire sword had flown back, and there was a Fengsheng beast's corpse lying not far away. Emo Tienga turned around and stood guard behind him. It wouldn't be scary if there was only one Fengsheng beast, but they were now surrounded by a group of Fengsheng beasts. The highest cultivation level of these Fengsheng beasts was in the 6th rank, while the lowest was only in the 3rd or 4th rank. There were more than a dozen of them, and they were completely surrounded. In a fight, they probably wouldn't have time to defend themselves. With that thought in mind, Emo Tienga waved the white silk handkerchief, which turned into a cloud of mist and firmly protected her body. Use metal and fire magic weapons. Qin, she said. The three-yong real fire sword attacked again, splashing a red light and attacking the Fengsheng beasts in front of them. Emo Tienga raised her hand, and a flying sword magic weapon appeared in her hand. She didn't have many magic weapons, but this flying sword was a metal attack magic weapon. Although it wasn't her forte, it was the most suitable magic weapon for now. At the same time, she untied her spiritual beast bag, and Xiaohua jumped out. Xiaohua had advanced to the 5th rank and possessed Sun Real Fire, so he was already a qualified fighting spiritual beast. Moreover, he was telepathically connected with Emo Tienga, so he pounced on the Fengsheng beast next to her without any command. This fight made her realize that she had to be strong in this place. Otherwise, she'd become a burden, and this was something she was most unwilling to do. Therefore, she didn't say anything. She put Xiaohua back into her spiritual beast bag and followed him. Chapter 276. She was familiar with the terrain, so he arrived at his destination in half a day. This is Crouching Cloud Ridge. Let's wait for a while. Emo Tienga glanced at the scenery in front of her. She was surrounded by large and small stones, and almost no grass grew. However, there was a dense red leaf forest in the west. From a distance, it looked like a sunset. No wonder it was called Crouching Cloud Ridge. She found a place to sit down and silently looked at the three-yong real fire sword on his knees. No one knew what he was thinking. Emo Tienga found a flat stone not far from him and sat down. She looked at the red leaf forest and asked, Senior Marshal Brother Shojing, is there any danger in that forest? She looked up and said, it's a kind of flying insect called red leaf ant. It's extremely poisonous. When they gather together, they're like trees. People who don't know what's going on can easily fall into their trap. I see. In that case, Madame Feng must be in their group to deal with these red leaf ants. Seeing Qin, she put away the 3-yong real fire sword and meditated with his eyes closed. Imo Tinga also sat cross-legged to adjust her breath. After killing the Fengxing beast and collecting its carcass, Imo Tinga was already tired. Now that she had used up most of her spiritual aura, she could take this opportunity to recover her spiritual aura. They waited for another half a day. Just as Imo Tinga finished recovering her spiritual aura, Qin she suddenly opened his eyes, looked at the road they came from, and said, "They're here." Imo Tinga also opened her eyes and looked in the direction he was looking at. There was no one in sight, but she could feel the breath of other cultivators at the edge of her divine sense. Sure enough, before long, a group of black spots appeared in the distance and flew towards them. Imo Tinga raised her eyebrows and looked at Qin. She was surprised. She underestimated him too much. He was in the peak stage of the core formation realm, so he was much stronger than her. Even if she practiced the soul refining art, she still couldn't catch up with him. She turned to look at the road and was stunned. These people seemed to be injured, and their flying posture was a bit unstable. Not long after, when they flew closer, they saw that there were indeed bloodstains on their bodies. Fellow Taoist Shoujing, fellow Taoist Qingwei. When it finally arrived, Taoist Kumu was relieved. Qin she frowned. Fellow Taoists, what's going on? The one who answered was Tong Tianyun. He seemed to be moving normally, with only minor injuries. Sigh. We were about to break the restriction to get the treasure when another group of cultivators came and fought with them. That's not a big deal. We're stronger than these people, but when we were fighting and both sides were injured, 2 nascent soul cultivators came. So, since there was a nascent soul cultivator interfering, the core formation cultivators naturally had to obediently back off. Imo Tinga couldn't help but glance at Qin Shi. Was it a coincidence? Or did he notice something? Aside from Tong Tianyun, Jing Xingji was the one with the least injuries. After all, he was a sword cultivator, and fights of magical powers were his forte. He said, those 2 nascent soul cultivators didn't have it easy either. There was a group of strange, flying insects hidden in that ship. As soon as we left, we saw them trigger the restriction and attract the flying insects to attack. Even if they obtained the magic treasure, they would definitely be injured. Tai off Shi Mo and Mo Mo's Mo. Good surprised. Day. Bayev. It turned out the spiritual aura she sensed was actually a group of flying insects. At this moment, Madame Feng was already sitting cross-legged with her eyes closed, meditating to heal her injuries. Without opening her eyes, she only sneered and said, "That flying insect is a type of extremely poisonous ancient flying insect. In my opinion, those 2 aren't just injured, they're seriously injured." Poisonous insects were the majority. Madame Feng specialized in poisons, so she naturally knew insects like the back of her hand. Hearing this, Taoist Kumu revealed a smile. In that case, it's a blessing in disguise. Yes, with our strength, I'm afraid we can't escape unscathed from dealing with so many flying insects. Hearing her words, the group of people who were originally indignant felt relieved and sat down to heal their injuries. Imo Tinga had a bad feeling. When they entered Demonic Mountain one day, all of them were full of spiritual aura, but after one day, 5 of them were injured. Tong Tianyun and Jing Xingji seemed to only have minor injuries, but the others' injuries couldn't be healed in a short time. Their strength had already been reduced. She glanced at Qin Shi and found that he was very calm. Just as she was wondering what he was thinking, she heard his private message. Get ready. We have to separate from them in advance. Imo Tinga was stunned. She glanced at him and replied, Senior Marshal brother, even if some of them are injured, they can still help us, right? Qin, she said, it's not because they're injured, but because they're obviously anxious. With this mentality, something bad will happen sooner or later. Imo Tinga didn't say anything. She knew Qin she was right. The 5 of them came to Demonic Mountain with a goal, but they couldn't control themselves in front of that magic weapon. Half a day passed. The first to finish healing was Taoist Kumu. He was a late-stage core formation cultivator after all. When Lei Dongxing and Madame Feng both stopped to adjust their breaths and said they were fine, the group continued to move forward. Their goal was the red leaf ant colony that looked no different from the forest. Protect yourself with spiritual aura, she said in a low voice when they stopped in front of the red leaves forest. Tinga nodded. After forming her gold core, her art of primordial unity energy had reached the initial level, and the white silk handkerchief's defensive function was much stronger than before, so she was very confident in protecting herself. Madame Feng, Taoist Kumu asked, "Are your injuries serious?" Madame Feng's face was still a bit pale, but she insisted, "It's not a big deal. They're just red leaf ants. I can deal with them." Tinga could see that Madame Feng's injuries definitely weren't serious. Her cultivation level and spells were only ordinary, and Tinga hadn't seen her with any top-grade magic weapons. It was most likely because she had extraordinary special techniques that she was able to enter this formation. Now, it was her turn to fight. If she couldn't do it, she would definitely lose her position. At that time, without the protection of her teammates, it would be difficult for her to survive on Demonic Mountain. Therefore, she could only force herself to fight. How could the others not know? But they wouldn't say much. They were all sensible people, and it was good that Madame Feng was sensible. Taoist Kumu nodded and said to the others, "That being the case, let's go in." This was the first time the 7 of them fought an enemy together, so Tinga was calm. She wanted to see what the others were capable of. They walked into the red leaf forest step by step. If Tinga hadn't known that these trees were all red leaf ants in disguise, she probably wouldn't have been on guard at all. These red leaf ants were too good at disguising themselves. From the trunks to the branches to the leaves, they were all very lifelike. Only by carefully observing with divine sense could one find that there were many tiny spiritual aura fluctuations on these trees. As if sensing their spiritual aura, the red leaves suddenly floated down from their heads, disintegrated in midair, and turned into red flying ants, pouncing on them. The 6 people surrounded Madame Feng. Each of them protected their bodies with spiritual aura and released their magic weapons. Tinga took out a jade bottle. This bottle was called the Royal Water Bottle. It had water properties and contained turbulent waves, which was the best way to deal with these red leaf ants with fire properties. Then she released Xiaohua. In a weak situation, spiritual beasts were the best companions. Seeing Xiaohua, Taoist Kumu glanced at it and looked a little surprised. 5th-rank spiritual beasts were rare, especially when their master was a cultivator in the early stage of the core formation realm. Spiritual beasts rarely had medicinal pills to eat, so it was often harder for them to advance in realms than cultivators. Generally, only cultivators like them who had been in the core formation realm for a long time could have spiritual beasts above the 5th rank. Soon, the red leaf ants pounced on them. They had no time to think about other things and focused on fighting the enemies. Tinga waved the white silk handkerchief, which turned into a mist and enveloped her body. Then she raised the royal water bottle into the air and poured down a column of water. Insects weren't classified as spiritual beasts. They didn't have any classification such as 1st or 2nd rank, and their individual spiritual aura was also very weak. Their strength was determined by the strength of their body and the strength of their toxicity. For example, these red leaf ants were good at camouflage, had hard shells, and were highly toxic. One wasn't a big deal, but there were so many of them. If there was an oversight, it would cause a lot of trouble. Therefore, a group of core formation cultivators didn't dare to relax in the face of these red leaf ants with weak spiritual aura, but extremely toxic and hard shells. Qin Shi's 3-yong real fire sword rose into the air and spread a red light. Wherever it went, the red leaf ants fell one after another and were all scorched black. Jing Xingji wasn't weak either. Although he used a sword like Qin Shi, his technique was completely different. The body of the sword was silvery white like snow, and the piercingly cold sword aura spread out, forming a silvery white light curtain in front of him. Lei Dongqing was still using his wine jar. Mo Tiange didn't know what kind of magic weapon this wine jar was, but she had miraculously seen it release spells of any of the 5 elements. Logically speaking, only those who had spiritual roots of a certain element could use spells of a certain element. Lei Dongqing naturally couldn't have 5 spiritual roots, so this magic weapon must be very special. Daoist Kumu and Tong Tianyun used another method. Tong Tianyun used some unknown spell with his bare hands, but as soon as these red leaf ants got close, they would fall. Daoist Kumu just muttered something and released a red-crowned crane he was riding to fight the enemies. The red leaf ants were small and weak, but there were so many of them that the 6 core formation cultivators couldn't kill them all in a short time. Instead, they had to carefully use their spiritual aura to protect themselves, lest they got bitten by accident. As more and more red leaf ants rushed into the sky, the pressure became greater and greater. Madame Feng, who was surrounded by them, sat down cross-legged, cautiously took out a small stove, burned a piece of incense, gathered spiritual aura in her palms, and pressed her palms on the incense burner. A fragrance that was neither orchid nor musk slowly spread out. Mo Tiange frowned slightly. This fragrance was a bit strange. At first, it smelled very good, but there was a strange smell that made people feel very uncomfortable. She immediately held her breath. Then she saw that the flying ants all over the sky seemed to be drunk. They slowed down, swayed left and right, and almost fell down with one slap. Seeing this, everyone became spirited and used all their magic weapons to quickly harvest these flying ants. With the help of Madame Feng's unique incense, the battle was finally over after 2 hours. Most of the red leaf forest had disappeared, and the remaining red leaf ants were scattered and no longer posed a threat. Madame Feng also put away the incense burner. The 7 of them fought and retreated, passing through the red leaf ant forest. Chapter 277. Some distance away from the red leaves forest, the 7 of them stopped to take a rest. Because they were prepared, although the red leaf ants were fierce, they didn't cause any actual harm to them. Madame Feng, who looked pale and seemed to have consumed too much spiritual aura, probably due to the special cultivation technique she used with the incense. Daoist Kumu asked, "Madame Feng, are your injuries serious?" Madame Feng swallowed a medicinal pill and shook her head. "My spiritual aura is just exhausted. I'll be fine after a short rest." "That's good." Daoist Kumu looked at the others. "Rest in groups. There's still a lot of danger ahead, so you have to keep your spiritual aura abundant." Half a day later, everyone finally finished resting and continued on their way. After passing this rocky slope, they entered a dark forest. In Demonic Mountain, the spiritual aura was chaotic, except for the part they just entered, which was no different from Mount Yuheng. The rest was full of rocks with almost no flowers or trees. Only after this part of the road did they appear one after another. However, the color of these plants was a bit strange. Most of them were dark green, which made people feel bad just by looking at them. Qin walked beside Mo Tiange and said, "The spiritual aura and devil aura are intertwined here, so these plants aren't ordinary spiritual plants." Mo Tiange carefully observed them. Sure enough, these trees all had a very obscure dark aura, which was obviously devil aura. No wonder the color of these trees was like this. After walking for a while in the forest, Daoist Kumu stopped first and said, "There's withered grass here, which can be regarded as a treasure. If you want to collect it, you can go now. The devil aura here is quite strong, so we can only stay for 2 hours at most. Plus, we have to hurry, so we only have an hour to search. We'll meet here in an hour." Mo Tiange turned to look at Qin Shi. "Qin," she said, "in that case, Junior Marshal's sister and I will go first." Daoist Kumu nodded. "Fellow Daoists, don't forget the meeting time." Qin Shi raised his hand, glanced at Mo Tiange, and took the lead to leave the group. Mo Tiange also saluted everyone, then turned around and followed after them. After walking in silence for a while, Qin Shi suddenly stopped. "Be careful of Kumu and Tong Tianyin. Mo Tiange was stunned. Senior Marshal Brother, what did you notice? Qin, she shook his head. So far, there's nothing suspicious. However, after thinking about it for a long time, I concluded that Old Man Tong must have prepared for this trip by exchanging for the 10,000-year-old spirit grass. But even if they obtained some unique treasures on Demonic Mountain, how many of them could be compared to 10,000-year-old spiritual plants? Mo Tiange thought about it and couldn't help but nod. That was right. Even if they obtained a 10,000-year-old spiritual plant on Demonic Mountain, it would still be an extremely sensational matter. With a 10,000-year-old spiritual plant, they could exchange it with a nascent soul cultivator for some spiritual objects that could help them advance their realms. Why would they still need to enter Demonic Mountain? What he was after was definitely more precious than a 10,000-year-old spiritual herb. Senior Marshal Brother, are you saying that they might be harboring evil intentions towards us? Not necessarily. Qin, she said, if they're plotting something big, then there's no need for them to make a move on us because of small loss. However, the reason why we've gathered together is to advance and retreat together. If they abandon us when they're in danger, we'll still be in danger. Mo Tiange was silent for a while, then asked, since that's the case, wouldn't it be better if we split up with them earlier? That's the only way. Unfortunately, I can't contact Master. Qin, she thought for a while, then took something out of his robe and gave it to her. Eat this. This is... The thing he gave her was a jade bottle used to store medicinal pills. Inside it was a bright red medicinal pill with a strange smell. She'd never seen it before. This is an 8 Immortals pill. After you eat it, your meridians will become extremely chaotic for a short period of time. At that time, pretend that you're seriously injured and can't walk. Leave the rest to me. Mo Tiange understood what he wanted to do. She was actually dispensable to this group. If she was seriously injured, the others certainly wouldn't be willing to let her drag them down. Mo Tiange didn't think too much and silently swallowed the 8 Immortals pill. At the same time, in the middle of the forest, 2 people were also talking in low voices. How much time do we have? The one who asked was Tong Tianyin. Daoist Kumu did some calculations, then said, at the earliest, we still have 7 days. 7 days. Time is too tight. Tong Tianyin sighed. It wasn't easy for us to get this opportunity. If we can't make it in time, we'll suffer a big loss. Daoist Kumu looked calm. Don't worry. This time, we've been prepared. The others aren't mediocre. We'll definitely reach Immortals' ruins within 7 days. Speaking of this, a trace of ruthlessness flashed across Tong Tianyun's thin face. Madame Feng is seriously injured. Will she drag us down? Daoist Kumu snorted and said coldly, you can rest assured about this. I've already thought about it. After we pass this forest, we'll encounter the chaotic Forbidden Zone. At that time, as long as we play a little trick, Madame Feng definitely won't be able to pass. That's for the best. Tong Tianyin thought for a moment, then asked, what about Mo Qingwei? Although her divine sense is indeed outstanding and her means aren't bad, her cultivation level is still a bit lacking. Forget about her, Daoist Kumu said slowly. Daoist Kumu said slowly, look at Qin Shoujing. He obviously values this junior marshal sister very much. If we play any tricks, I'm afraid we won't be able to hide it from him. It'll be bad if he turns against us. Besides, Madame Feng is seriously injured, but Mo Qingwei has been preserving her strength. She's more or less a help. In times of crisis, we can just ignore her. As he said that, he glanced at Tong Tianyin. So it was you who advised me that this master Daoist Qingwei's strength isn't bad. She probably won't drag us down. Tong Tianyin smiled, his dry face distorted horribly. He nodded in agreement. You're right. Although Mo Qingwei's cultivation level isn't high, she's extremely lucky. She hasn't been injured along the way, and, judging from her moves, she's also not bad in fights of magical power. He then shook his head. Alas, this Qin Shoujing is really something. What kind of place is Demonic Mountain? He actually brought his junior marshal sister, who just formed her gold core. Not only do we have to worry about Qin Shoujing, but we also have to worry about their master, Lord Daoist Jinghe. Being tied up is really troublesome. Taoist Kumu snorted and said, "Why don't you think about it? If Mo Qingwei doesn't come, where can we get 10,000-year-old spiritual plants? Although crystal soul jade is good stuff, it's nothing in the eyes of those nascent soul cultivators. Without 10,000-year-old spiritual plants, we don't have the capital to bargain." That is true. Tong Tianyun was persuaded by Taoist Kumu, but after thinking about it, he still had some doubts. He asked, "Don't you think this Mo Qingwei looks a bit familiar?" And Taoist Kumu didn't take it seriously and said casually, "Does she look like an old lover of yours?" Tong Tianyun snorted. "I don't look like a human or a ghost. How could I have an old lover? Don't you really think she looks familiar? Especially when she fights of magical power." Hearing that, Taoist Kumu also remembered. "It seems a bit familiar, but isn't she an elite disciple of Xianqing school? She's so young and has just formed her gold core, so she must have been cultivating on Mount Taikong. How could we have seen her? We might not have seen her in person." Tong Tianyun said while thinking, I seem to have seen someone who looks a bit similar to her." Similar? Taoist Kumu thought for a long time and shook his head. "I don't have any impression. Her surname is Mo, but we don't seem to know any cultivators with the surname Mo." Tong Tianyun thought for a while, but couldn't think of anything. Just as he was about to say something, his divine sense suddenly sensed someone approaching. He immediately said, "Someone's back." Before long, a person came out of the dense forest. When the two of them saw who it was, they were both shocked. He didn't even have the strength to greet the two of them. He put Mo Tinga down, fed her a medicinal pill, and felt her meridians. His brows furrowed even more tightly. "Fellow Taoist Shojing, what happened?" Taoist Kumu asked first. She didn't even raise his head. "We encountered demonic beasts." Although it was just a sentence, the other two looked at each other and saw the surprise in each other's eyes. Mo Tinga was obviously injured. Her chest was full of blood stains, her face was pale, and her breath was weak. It seemed her injuries weren't light. Tong Tianyun also reached out, pressed Mo Tinga's pulse, and explored her meridians. He frowned as soon as he did. Her meridians were too chaotic. He gave Taoist Kumu a look, and the two of them fell into contemplation. Madame Fong was seriously injured, but at least she could move freely. Mo Tinga was obviously half dead, much more seriously injured than Madame Fong. She looked a little anxious, as if he didn't see anything. He supported Mo Tinga and asked softly, "Junior Marshal Sister, how are you?" Mo Tinga opened her eyes with difficulty, but immediately closed them again. She just shook her head gently. "Don't worry, she said. His voice was unprecedentedly soft. "Rest for a while. When we get out of the forest, we'll find a place to heal your injuries." Hearing this, Taoist Kumu and Tong Tianyun looked at each other with a strange expression. Qin Shojing actually wanted to stall for time? Cough. Taoist Kumu cleared his throat and said, "Fellow Taoist Shojing, how could your junior martial sister be so seriously injured?" She didn't look up. "It's useless to talk about this now. Fellow Taoists, let's get out of the forest quickly. You don't have to worry. My junior martial sister can take care of herself." The two of them didn't speak anymore. They communicated with each other with their eyes, both feeling a little unhappy. They both understood the meaning of Qin Shi's words. He was telling them that he would never give up on this junior martial sister. After a while, late Dongqing, Madame Fong, and Jing Xingji came back one after another. They were all startled to see Mo Tinga's appearance. "How did you come back?" She looked up with an indifferent expression. "Since you're all back, let's go." Fellow Taoist Shojing. Taoist Kumu finally spoke. "Your junior martial sister is so seriously injured. Do you still want to take her with you?" She glanced at him and said gloomily, "What do you mean, fellow Taoist Kumu? Do you want me to leave my junior martial sister here?" "Of course not." Taoist Kumu hastily denied. "It's just, your junior martial sister's injuries won't heal in a short time. If fellow Taoist insists on continuing, I'm afraid her injuries will only worsen, won't they?" Shi's expression softened, and he said, "Then, what's fellow Taoist's idea?" Seeing that he didn't seem to be angry, Taoist Kumu continued to say, I have an idea, but I don't know what fellow Taoist Shojing thinks. We've only been on Demonic Mountain for 2 days, and most of the time was wasted on other things. If fellow Taoist takes your junior martial sister out of Demonic Mountain now, it'll only take 1 day at most. In that case, why don't you take her back and come back? Right after he finished speaking, she sneered. Fellow Taoist, this is a good idea. In the end, you still think my junior martial sister is a burden to you, right? Fellow Taoist Kumu didn't say that. Tong Tianyun took over the conversation. His hoarse voice was a bit harsh. Fellow Taoist, think about it. Master Taoist Qingwei's injuries are so serious. What will happen if she continues? You don't have to worry about that. I'll protect her. Fellow Taoist Shojing. Seeing how stubborn he was, Taoist Kumu was also annoyed. We entered Demonic Mountain to look for treasures. If you take your junior martial sister with you like this, what should we do? She didn't say anything. He just stared coldly at the people in front of him. Taoist Kumu and Tong Tianyun were very persistent. Madame Feng and Lei Dongqing looked away. Jing Xingji seemed to sigh regretfully and no longer looked at him. These people's attitudes were very obvious. There was no need to say anything. I understand. She finally spoke. Taoist Kumu and Tong Tianyun heaved sighs of relief. Just when they thought he accepted their suggestion, they heard him say, You're still worried about being implicated. That being the case, we'd better go our separate ways. From now on, our lives and death have nothing to do with you. You. Everyone was stunned. Taoist Kumu blurted out, Fellow Taoist Shojing, don't be impulsive. Aren't you courting death by taking your junior martial sister with you? I survived more than 80 years ago, let alone today. Shi's voice was flat, but it carried a hint of pride. Fellow Taoists, farewell. After saying that, he ignored them. He picked up Mo Tiange and walked out of the forest. Chapter 278. After Qin Shi and Mo Tiange left, the forest became quiet. Lei Dongqing touched his bald head and looked at Taoist Kumu. What's wrong with Qin Shojing? He wasn't this kind before. Madame Feng sneered and said, I'm afraid he has some thoughts about this junior martial sister. I really didn't expect Qin Shojing to have such a day. Woman Feng. Lei Dongqing squinted at her. Are you dissatisfied because you couldn't seduce him? Madame Feng still sneered. No matter how talented Qin Shojing is and how handsome he is, what does it have to do with me? Aren't you jealous at all? Lei Dongqing asked recklessly. Madame Feng was annoyed. Old Lei, get lost. I'm not that bored. While the two of them were arguing, the other 3 people didn't say anything. After a while, Taoist Kumu finally understood and looked at Jing Xingji. Fellow Taoist Jing, what do you think? Jing Xingji, who had been thinking, shook his head. I can't guess Qin Shojing's thoughts. Since he doesn't want to accept, we can only do this. Taoist Kumu and Tong Tianyun glanced at each other, feeling depressed. They were clear about Qin Shojing's ability. Back then, he was already the strongest among them, let alone now. The peak stage of the core formation realm was much stronger than the middle stage of the core formation realm. In fact, they were afraid of inviting Qin Shojing this time. After more than 80 years, no one knew how strong he was now. Last time, when they saw him fighting with Jing Xingji in the middle of the night, they secretly asked Jing Xingji about it. But Jing Xingji didn't say anything. However, judging from his expression, he was obviously very afraid of Qin Shojing. Now that Qin Shojing left, the strength of their team was greatly affected, and they didn't know whether they could pass the next hurdle or not. Tong Tianyun knew what Taoist Kumu was thinking and whispered, It's good that he left. Otherwise, we still have to be on guard against him. Taoist Kumu nodded inwardly. Indeed, Qin Shojing was a great help, but if he fell out with them, it would be troublesome. Clearing his throat, Taoist Kumu raised his voice. Everyone, since those 2 fellow Taoists have other ideas, we shouldn't force them. Only the 5 of us will go next. We all know that. Lei Dongqing pouted. There's no other way. Old Taoist, let's find a place to rest first. There are many people, and they're all injured. Among them, Madame Feng was the only one who had suffered the most serious injury. Naturally, he said this for her sake. Upon hearing what he said, Madame Feng's expression eased a little, and she also looked towards Taoist Kumu. Hesitation flashed in Taoist Kumu's eyes, but he quickly made a decision. All right, let's get out of here as soon as possible and find a safe place to rest for the time being. In any case, their current strength was a bit lacking, but Madame Feng couldn't be left behind. Once they were out of the forest, Qin summoned his flying cloud and flew close to the ground with Mo Tinga in his arms. Mo Tinga moved several hundred miles away before she finally raised her head and asked, "Are you all right now?" She stopped the flying cloud and let go of her. With an expressionless face, he said, "It's all right now. You should adjust your breathing first. After a while, your spiritual aura will flow smoothly." Mo Tinga looked around. The place they were currently in was a flat grassland. What was rare was that this place was full of pure spiritual aura and didn't have any devil aura at all. Because of that, the weeds grew very lush and green. It was a normal color. She randomly chose a place to sit down and meditated cross-legged. The 8 Immortals pill was actually a kind of medicinal pill that could help with cultivation. It was concocted from 8 kinds of rare spiritual plants. When one took it, the spiritual aura seemed chaotic, but in fact, it was because the medicinal power of this medicinal pill impacted the meridians. As long as one meditated and adjusted their breathing for a while, the medicinal power would flow smoothly. Just now, when Mo Tinga took the 8 Immortals pill, they casually got some blood from the Fengsheng beast's corpse, so it looked like she was attacked by a demonic beast. If one looked carefully, it would be very easy to see that she wasn't really injured. However, men and women were different, and Qin was here, so Kumu and Taoist Kumu naturally wouldn't look carefully. Mo Tinga began to adjust her breathing. She raised his hand and summoned the 3-yong real fire sword. With a wave of his hand, the sword turned into thousands of red sword lights that leisurely circled around the two of them, forming a sword formation around them. When Mo Tinga finished adjusting her breathing, she opened her eyes and saw this incomparably gorgeous sword lights. She secretly praised in her heart. No wonder there are so many sword cultivators. Not only are they strong in fights of magical powers, but their sword moves are always more gorgeous than other spells. Seeing that she finished adjusting her breathing, Qin, who was also meditating on the side, also opened his eyes. She had completely dissolved the medicinal power of the 8 Immortals pill, so her meridians were very smooth. She stood up. "Then let's go." Tinga silently stood up and followed him. She knew the route of Kumu and the others very well, so he deliberately avoided them and chose another direction. Since we're not going the same way as them, we might as well take a shortcut. Mo Tinga was a bit confused. "Senior Marshal brother, since we can take a shortcut, why did we go with them in the beginning?" She didn't speak for a while. After a while, he said, "There's a spiritual plant growing on that road, which is the main material for concocting clear sky pills." After a pause, he continued to say, "More than 80 years ago, I entered Demonic Mountain together with them. Whether it's in terms of strength or character, they were both passable. Besides, your father was also friends with them back then, so presumably, you'd also be willing to meet his old friends." He was now in the peak stage of the core formation realm, so no matter how powerful clear sky pills were, they were useless to him. Presumably, the second reason was the real reason. Mo Tinga lowered her head and didn't say anything. She didn't know whether this was an illusion or not, but it really terrified her. Ever since she left Xianqing school with him, the things that happened and the times they spent together made her doubt what she originally believed. She vaguely felt that this was the senior martial brother Qin from back then. There were some things he didn't need to do at all, but if he did, there would be no other reason than to think of her. Could it be that her previous perception was wrong? It wasn't that she was Qin Shoujing, but that Qin Shoujing was Qin Shi? It's useless to talk about this now. He sighed softly, looking very worried. This time, not to mention others, Kumu and Old Tong are obviously disloyal. That being the case, It's better if we don't go the same way as them. It'd be best if we don't run into them again. Mo, Tinga answered with her head lowered, absent-mindedly. She noticed this and turned to stare at her. What are you thinking about? Mo Tinga felt as if she was caught doing something bad on the spot, so she was a bit flustered. No, nothing. After staring at her for a long time, she turned back. Focus. There's only the two of us, so we can't be distracted. Got it. Before they set off, she was resentful that she ignored her existence. Now that they were on Demonic Mountain, she had to be more careful if she didn't want to be looked down upon by him. Mo Tinga took a deep breath, threw her messy thoughts to the back of her mind, and followed him briskly. After walking for a while, she suddenly stopped and listened attentively, seemingly using his divine sense to detect something. After a while, he said, "How's your breath-concealing technique?" Breath-concealing technique? Mo Tinga didn't understand what he wanted to do. However, although her breath-concealing technique was ordinary, it wouldn't be a problem for her to pretend to be immortal with the spirit-concealing pendant on her. She immediately stopped using the art of chaotic origin, concealed her aura, and asked, "Is this okay?" She was slightly surprised. What kind of breath-concealing technique is this? It's actually so miraculous? Mo Tinga shook her head. My breath-concealing technique is really ordinary. I have to thank Senior Marshall Brothers' spirit-concealing pendant for this. When I met Great Ancestor back then, Great Ancestor refined this pendant again. With this thing, I can completely conceal my aura. I see. With this explanation, she felt relieved. Since a deification senior refined this pendant, it was naturally much stronger than when he refined it. Mo Tinga hesitated for a moment, then asked, "Senior Marshal Brother, if we completely conceal our aura, we won't even be able to release our protective spiritual aura. What if we encounter a wandering restriction?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, he waved his arm, taking back the light curtain formed by the 3 Yang real fire sword that had been protecting them. He then used an art. After a while, he also didn't carry any spiritual aura on his body, just like her. After that, he took out 2 talismans and handed one to her. This is a spirit-transforming talisman. It can form a barrier around your body. Outsiders can't feel it, but it can block those restrictions. Mo Tinga took it, nodded, and stuck it on her body as he said. After that, she said, "There are people fighting ahead. Their cultivation levels are only in the foundation building realm, but we don't need to cause trouble. We can just go around them." Mo Tinga didn't object. They had their own destination, so it wasn't worthwhile to get involved in a dispute for these spiritual treasures. They were only foundation building cultivators now. Maybe some core formation cultivators would pass by later. If they got involved, they wouldn't be able to get rid of them. After doing all that, the 2 of them turned into flight lights and continued to move forward silently. After a while, Mo Tinga also sensed something with her divine sense. There were spiritual aura fluctuations in the distance. 2 groups of people were fighting. This was a common occurrence on Demonic Mountain. Although there were many secret treasures on the mountain, there were dangers everywhere. Cultivators below the nascent soul realm didn't dare to go too deep and could only try their luck in the periphery. If they happened to see a spiritual treasure, just like the boat-shaped magic weapon they saw, it would cause a lot of people to fight over it. Therefore, on Demonic Mountain, not only did they have to guard against the restrictions left behind, but they also had to guard against demonic beasts, poisonous creatures, and sneak attacks from other cultivators. In this way, most of the cultivators who died on Demonic Mountain were killed by their own kind. Mo Tinga was about to quietly go around when she suddenly stopped. There were 2 groups of people fighting. One group had 6 people, and the other group had 5 people. In the group of 6, there were 4 men and 2 women. Most of them were in the early stage of the foundation building realm. 1 man and 1 woman were in the middle stage of the foundation building realm. Although they had 1 more person than their opponents, they were in a suppressed situation. Among the 5 opponents, 4 were in the middle stage of the foundation building realm, and only 1 was in the early stage. Right now, both sides were fighting fiercely. Magic tools were all used, and spells filled the sky. Near them, Tinga saw a stalk of spiritual plant that looked several thousand years old. Although they were fighting fiercely, they cautiously avoided that stalk of spiritual plant. Apparently, they were fighting because of this spiritual plant. Seeing that she stopped moving, she turned his head and asked, "What's wrong?" Tinga stared at the people in the field and said, "Look at them." Chapter 279. She turned around and looked at them. His brows slowly wrinkled. "They're people from Yunwu's sect." Tinga finished his sentence. She sighed softly as she looked at their black robes. This was a set of clothes they were familiar with. Fortunately, the sect's emblem was still a few clouds. It seemed the matter Lu Yidao talked about last time had succeeded. Yunwu sect had retaken its monastery, and from now on, it no longer needed to be bullied by Zixia sect. What made Tinga stop wasn't only because she saw Yunwu sect's disciples, but because the two women among them looked very familiar. It's them. She also recognized them. And, after watching for a while, Tinga turned around and said, "Senior Marshal Brother Shojing, if you want to go, then go. They're just a few foundation-building cultivators." She said flatly. Tinga hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Thank you." The 6 people from Yunwu's sect were obviously at a disadvantage, especially since their opponents were all male cultivators. While they were fighting, they also made dirty jokes about the 2 women among them. When the 2 women heard their opponents teasing, one looked ashamed and resentful, while the other looked extremely cold. Tinga couldn't help but recall that nearly 70 years ago, when they were in Miwu Valley, they were also teased by Zixia sect's disciples. Both of them were angry at that time, but now, one looked disappointed and ashamed while the other ignored everything. She sighed softly and released her spiritual aura pressure. The spiritual aura pressure of a core formation cultivator shrouded them. The 11 people present were all shocked and stopped fighting one after another. When they turned around, they saw Tinga standing not far from them, and she's standing behind her. The first thing the 5 non-Yunwu sect disciples noticed was the clothes they were wearing. Shocked, they hastily bowed and saluted them. Turns out it's core formation seniors from Xianqing School. "Juniors greet you." Upon hearing what he said, the people from Yunwu's sect were also shocked. They also bowed to greet him. "Juniors greet seniors." Tinga nodded and looked at the 5 cultivators first. "Which cultivation group are you from?" Shame appeared on the 5 people's faces. The leader answered respectfully, "Senior, we were originally disciples of Jingxin's sect." Jingxin's sect? He had never heard of this sect. The leader was very quick-witted. When he saw the confusion on her face, he immediately said, "The Pure Heart sect is just a small sect. Now, it was destroyed decades ago. After we destroyed our own sect, we became rogue cultivators." "I see. This kind of sect extermination wasn't rare. There were many small and medium-sized cultivation groups in the Celestial Pole. If their talents withered or if they provoked a powerful enemy, it was very likely that their sect would be exterminated overnight. Those who escaped had nowhere to go for a while, so they became individual cultivators. Seeing that her attitude was amiable, the man became bolder and said, "Does Senior fancy this crimson-red grass? If Senior takes a fancy to it, Junior will naturally offer it up with both hands." The corners of Tinga's mouth couldn't help but curve upwards. This man was very good at talking. Although the 5 of them were stronger than the 6 people from Yunwu's sect, it didn't mean that Yunwu's sect had no chance of winning. If she took a fancy to this crimson grass, they naturally wouldn't have any hope. The implication of this person's words was that he directly took the credit for offering the grass and ignored the people from Yunwu's sect. In any case, they also wouldn't dare to raise any objections. The 6 people from Yunwu's sect naturally understood the meaning of his words and glared at each other. The man immediately raised his eyebrows and said, "Don't tell me you want to compete with a core formation senior for this spiritual plant?" Upon hearing what he said, the people from Yunwu's sect became even more angry and anxious. On one hand, they felt this person was really hateful. With just a few words, he wanted to frame them for wanting to compete with a core formation cultivator over a spiritual plant. On the other hand, they were afraid Mo Tienga would really misunderstand. Among the 6 people, only the middle stage foundation building female cultivator looked calm. At that moment, she respectfully bowed and raised her hand. Since seniors want this spiritual plant, junior naturally doesn't have any reason to compete. Senior, please don't listen to this person's provocation. Mo Tienga stared at this female cultivator. Her expression was calm and her manner was magnanimous. She really had the courage to stand on her own. She couldn't help but sigh again. Senior Marshall's sister Wong, long time no see. Once she said that, the female cultivator was dumbfounded. The other people present, including the 5 non-Yunwu sect cultivators, were also dumbfounded. Senior Marshall's sister Wong, they all heard Yunwu sect cultivators call this female cultivator, and they indeed called her Senior Marshall's sister Wong. Who was this core formation senior in the end? She actually called this female cultivator that. The 2 Yunwu sect female cultivators stared at Mo Tienga attentively. All of a sudden, one of them cried out in surprise, "You're Junior Marshall brother Yi." Mo Tienga smiled and nodded at that person. Senior Marshall's sister Shun. These 2 people were Wang Qianyi and Shen Bing from back then. Shen Bing's cultivation level was in the early stage of the foundation building realm, but her beauty hadn't decreased from before. As for Wang Qianyi, she was already in the middle stage of the foundation building realm. Compared to Shen Bing in the past, she wasn't very eye-catching. Now, however, she was as cold as ice and as beautiful as a peach. Mo Tienga couldn't help but recall the bitter experiences they had all these years. Back then, Shen Bing was forced to become a concubine, while Wang Qianyi married her enemy. More than 10 years later, Lu Yidao mentioned to her that Shen Bing was already free, while Wang Qianyi was still married to that person. Mo Tienga didn't know whether they had escaped from the sea of bitterness or not. Judging from their current appearances, they seemed to be living pretty well. Upon hearing Shen Bing's reminder, Wang Qianyi also remembered. Astonishment appeared on her calm and composed face. You're really Junior Marshall brother Yi? Mo Tienga nodded with a bitter smile. They hadn't seen each other for more than 60 years. She never expected their next meeting would be like this. Upon seeing this scene, the expressions of the 5 people in the small group changed greatly. They never expected this core formation senior would actually be acquainted with the other party. Right now, their faces were filled with apprehension and trepidation. They didn't know whether the senior would kill them out of anger or not. After hesitating for a long time, the leader finally said, "Turns out these fellow Taoists are senior's old acquaintances. Juniors really had eyes, but failed to see. I hope senior won't take offense." In the end, he was already begging, and Mo Tienga cast them an indifferent glance, then said, "That'll do. I won't make things difficult for you. You can leave now." Upon hearing what she said, the 5 people were overjoyed. They repeatedly cupped their hands and said, "Thank you, senior. Thank you, senior." They didn't dare to stay any longer. Using their flying magic tools, they quickly fled into the distance. Mo Tienga no longer paid attention to them. She smiled at Wang Qianyi and Shen Bing. Not bad. Senior Marshall sisters have a good memory. Upon receiving her affirmation, Wang Qianyi and Shen Bing glanced at each other, feeling very strange. She was wearing Xianxing School's robe, emitting the spiritual aura pressure of a core formation cultivator, and her movements were confident and calm. She was completely different from the cautious and smiling Junior Marshall brother Yi from back then. What made them feel even more strange was that although Junior Marshall brother Yi was a handsome youth, he didn't look like a woman at all. On the other hand, Mo Tienga in front of them was elegant and elegant. She obviously looked like a woman. After a long time, Wang Qianyi sighed with a gloomy expression. Turns out we were blind back then. Junior Marshall brother Yi, have you been well these years? Where did you go? Mo Tienga also sighed when she mentioned the past. When she met Lu Yidao at Xianxing School, although they talked about what happened after they parted, she asked him not to reveal her whereabouts. Although Lu Yidao wasn't too kind about Su Jingji's matter, it seemed he still covered it up for her. About what happened back then. Senior Marshal sisters, when you go back, you can ask Senior Marshal Brother Lu. Senior Marshal Brother Lu knows? Wang Qianyi was surprised. Mo Tiange nodded and didn't say much about this issue. Instead, she asked, Senior Marshal sisters, why did you come to Demonic Mountain? Wang Qianyi sighed and said, Junior Marshal Brother Yi, you might not know this, but although we recaptured Yunwu's sect, we suffered disastrous losses. We only have a few core formation cultivators left. If we followed the usual routine, I'm afraid we wouldn't be able to advance to the core formation realm. So we can take a gamble. I see. Mo Tiange thought for a moment, then said, this place is already very dangerous for foundation building cultivators. Take the spiritual plant and go back. In the end, fated chances aren't as important as your lives. Shenbing was pleasantly surprised. Junior Marshal Brother Yi, are you saying you'll let us have this spiritual plant? Mo Tiange nodded. She naturally didn't care about a mere 1,000-year-old spiritual plant. She thought again and took out several jade bottles and talismans from her robe. Now isn't the time to reminisce. If we're fated, we'll go out and talk about our feelings after we parted. Take these medicinal pills and go out. This dangerous place isn't something you can handle. Wang Qianyi silently took the things Mo Tiange handed her and solemnly saluted her. Thank you. Mo Tiange smiled. Without saying anything, she turned around and walked towards Qinshi. Junior Marshal Brother Yi, Wang Qianyi called out from behind her, how are we going to find you in the future? Mo Tiange waved her hand. Go ask Senior Marshal Brother Lu yourself. We'll meet again someday. Once she finished speaking, she once again concealed her aura and left with Qinshi. Watching their backs, Shen Bing's brows furrowed even tighter. She suddenly asked, Junior Marshal Sister Wang, look, isn't that Senior Marshal Brother Qin? Senior Marshal Brother Qin? Wang Qianyi didn't understand what Mo Tiange meant at first, but when she recalled that person's appearance, she was also shocked. Is that Senior Marshal Brother Qin? It's most likely him. Shen Bing watched their backs as they left together. Her expression was complicated. So Junior Marshal Brother Yi is actually a woman, and he also became a disciple of Xianxing School together with Senior Marshal Brother Qin. I really don't know what they experienced. The two of them looked at each other in silence, pondering in their hearts. Mo Tiange's appearance reminded them of many old things. Some of these old things were very happy, but some were very sad. The other four cultivators were dumbfounded as they watched what happened. Finally, one of them couldn't help but ask, Senior Marshal sisters, why did you call that Senior? Junior Marshal Brother Yi? Wang Qianyi smiled bitterly and said, more than 60 years ago, she was a disciple of our Yunwu sect. Presumably, she was a woman disguised as a man. What? The four people were shocked. More than 60 years ago, Senior Marshal's sister still hadn't built her foundation, right? Correct. Wang Qianyi stared in the direction they left. At that time, Junior Marshal Brother Ye's cultivation level was even lower than ours. She was just an aura refining disciple. We originally thought something bad had happened to her, but unexpectedly, the affairs of the world were unpredictable. Mo Tiange couldn't help but think of these words. Back then, Junior Marshal Brother Yi, Senior Marshal Brother Qin, and Senior Marshal Brother Jiang disappeared together. The branch master also said that Junior Marshal Brother Yi was a traitor. Both Wang Qianyi and Shen Bing didn't believe it, but since they couldn't find Mo Tiange, they couldn't do anything about it. Later, they gradually forgot about this matter. She really didn't expect that after more than 60 years, they would actually see Junior Marshal Brother Yi again. Only then did they discover that she was actually a woman and had even formed her gold core. Shen Bing said in a daze that Senior Marshal Brother Qin seems to have also formed his gold core. They are actually so talented. Chapter 280. After seeing Wang Qianyi and Shen Bing, Mo Tiange's mood was somewhat heavy. For the first time, she witnessed the tragic fate of female cultivators. One lost her father and had to marry her enemy. The other lost her freedom and became a puppet. They were cultivators, but they were also women. Without enough power, they couldn't even protect their bodies. This world was just so cruel. Fortunately, they seemed to be doing well now. Although they didn't have enough pills and were still struggling on the path of cultivation, at least they had freedom. After thinking for a while, she suddenly asked, "Do you sympathize with them?" Tiango was stunned for a moment before she answered, "Of course. They were very miserable." "How? Is it terrible?" "For a woman, if she can't even protect herself, of course it's miserable." She didn't say anything. No one knew what he was thinking. The two of them concealed their auras and avoided the other cultivators. Their journey was daunting but not dangerous, and they arrived at the foot of a mountain. Tiango looked up. "It's so high. Even if we fly, it'll be very difficult to fly up, right?" Demonic Mountain was the highest mountain in the celestial pole, worthy of its name. This mountain peak pierced straight into the clouds, and its peak couldn't be seen at all. She said, "There's a place we can land on, so flying up won't be a problem. It's just that." He stared at the lightning formed by the intertwining spiritual aura and devil aura in midair. "There are a lot of restrictions on this place. If we're not careful, we might turn into ashes." Tiango was shocked. Ashes scattered and vanished in a puff of smoke. In other words, they couldn't even be saved. "Don't overthink it," she said calmly. "It might take us 2 days to reach the summit. There's still many restrictions up there that need to be broken, so it's very troublesome. Let's go up there as soon as possible." The two of them used their own methods to protect themselves. Tiango used the art of primordial singular energy and took out the white silk handkerchief, transforming it into a mist-like barrier. Shi, on the other hand, also used his body-protecting art. He also made the 3-yang real fire sword transform into a body-protecting sword formation that surrounded the two of them. Tiango hesitated for a moment before saying, "Senior Martial Brother Qin, you come a bit closer to me. I don't have enough spiritual aura, so I can't reach this protective magic weapon." She was stunned. He didn't know whether it was because of the way she addressed him or because of what she said. In the end, he only responded softly. This peak was called 10,000 Feet Peak. Although it might not be 10,000 feet high, it was not far from it. The spiritual qi and devil qi in this area were turbulent and intertwined with each other. The two of them did not dare to fly too fast and could only advance bit by bit. To maintain the same distance, Tiango didn't use her own flying magic weapon. Instead, she boarded Shi's flying cloud. Half a day later, the two of them rested on the mountain wall for a while before continuing forward. At this moment, they were already close to the place where spiritual aura and devil aura intertwined in the sky. They were surrounded by protective spiritual aura, followed by defensive talismans, then a layer of spiritual aura formed by Tiango's white silk handkerchief, and finally, Shi's sword formation. Even with 4 layers of defense, he did not dare to let his guard down. When she passed through the spiritual aura and devil aura, Tiango heard the sword formation outside making buzzing sounds. Fortunately, the 3-yang real fire sword wasn't an ordinary magic weapon. Whether it was spiritual aura or devil aura, it was able to block it. However, every time he blocked it, the sword formation would emit a red light, and she would have to stop for a while to resist it. The two of them went up bit by bit, but the higher they went, the more difficult it became. In the end, it was no longer Shi's problem alone. Although his sword formation could block most of the attacks, it couldn't completely resolve them. So Tiango used the white silk handkerchief to help. She had already said that they couldn't be the slightest bit careless in this place. As long as the spiritual aura and devil aura broke through their defense layer, there would be no way to save them, and they would instantly turn into ashes. Here, when their spiritual aura was about to be exhausted again, she pointed at a tiny crack in the mountain wall. Inside it was an extremely small cave. In order to resist the restrictions, gales, and lightning formed by the intertwining spiritual aura and devil aura, they had to maintain enough spiritual aura. Now that their spiritual aura was almost exhausted, they had to find a place to adjust their breathing and recover. The two of them squeezed into this small cave with difficulty and heaved sighs of relief. The crack in this cave was very small, so they could only pass through it sideways. With the mountain wall blocking them, there were no gales or big restrictions. There was only weak spiritual aura and devil aura. But it was really too small. It was only big enough for the two of them to sit side by side. They were so close together that they almost couldn't move. Tinga felt very uncomfortable. She wasn't used to being so close to other people. Just as she was about to lean to the side, she heard Shi say, "Don't move. Quickly meditate and recover your spiritual aura." Tinga knew what he said was right, so she could only endure it. She sat cross-legged, slowly adjusted her breathing, and entered a meditative state. After a while, her spiritual aura finally recovered, and she opened her eyes. A large mass of devil aura floated over from outside and blocked the entrance of the crack. She had already finished adjusting his breathing and was waiting for her. He was startled and said, "Wait a moment. There's too much devil aura." The devil aura on Demonic Mountain was very violet. Once it sensed cultivators' breaths, it would rush forward and swallow them. Most of this devil aura was left behind from the distant past era. How could cultivators resist it? A small mass of devil aura could be eliminated, but such a large mass of devil aura couldn't be avoided. This mass of devil aura blocked the light that leaked through the crack and also blocked the sounds outside. Darkness and silence embraced each other. Cultivators' eyesight was better than mortals. Even if there was no light, they could roughly distinguish the things in front of them. But there was no light, and everything in front of her was hazy. This kind of haze made Tinga restless. She heard light breathing. After listening for a while, she seemed to hear a heartbeat again. At first, it was calm, but gradually became rapid. She pressed her chest and found it was hers. Strange. She tilted her head and thought to herself, "I just finished meditating, so my heart shouldn't be beating so fast." This kind of depression also seemed to affect Shi. He moved, and his arm rubbed against her sleeve. The faintly discernible contact made Tinga even more afraid to move. It seemed too close. Even their breaths were intertwined. This kind of awkward silence didn't last long. Suddenly, she heard Shi say, "That year, your father and I also flew up from here." Tinga was stunned and turned her head. In the darkness, Shi's eyes shone brightly. He said softly, "At that time, a big restriction collapsed. More than half of the people who stayed on Demonic Mountain died or were injured. Your father and I happened to be here, so we avoided the disaster." "This place," Tinga murmured. She reached out and touched the mountain wall next to her. "Father, has he also sat here and touched these stones?" "We hid for 7 days before the restriction finally stabilized, but when we went out the way we came, we found we couldn't get out." Tinga suddenly remembered that the restriction on Demonic Mountain only existed for about a month. If the restriction reappeared, they wouldn't be able to get out. And if they stayed here, they didn't know when the restriction would disappear again. The situation inside was unpredictable, and ordinary people couldn't wait until Demonic Mountain opened again. "Then, how did you get out?" "The secret is up there," Shi said. "There's a place they call Immortals' Ruins. According to legend, it's the place where immortals fell and were buried in the distant past era. The road to Immortals' Ruins is full of difficulties and dangers. Countless people died on that road in the past. However, they didn't know that there was actually a shortcut. If you go up this tens of thousands of feet peak, you'll reach the back of Immortals' Ruins." Tinga was stunned. "There's a road in Immortals' Ruins that leads to the outside world?" She shook his head. "That's not accurate. The terrain there is very complicated. No one knows which place Immortals' Ruins is referring to. After we were trapped on Demonic Mountain, we searched many places and finally found a place with a restriction that could be broken." Hearing this, Tinga thought for a while and became even more confused. "If we can get out, can we also go in? Doesn't that mean we don't have to wait for the restriction outside to disappear?" She smiled and said, "Your thinking is too simple. At that time, we encountered a lot of dangers. When we found that place, we were all injured. Your father's injury was especially serious. He almost couldn't survive. When we gradually finished taking medicinal pills, his injury still didn't improve. After a pause, he continued, "My injury was relatively light, so it wasn't a big problem. But even if we found that the restriction in that place was relatively weak and could be broken, we didn't have enough cultivation. According to my calculations, we needed to have at least the cultivation level of the nascent soul realm. Moreover, the restriction on Demonic Mountain is very special. If it wasn't because our inner force was weak, even if it was broken, the restriction would repair itself. I also thought so, but after I went out, I found that the restriction inside looked weak, but the one outside was much stronger than the one outside. Then what happened next? The cultivation technique I practice is called the art of 3 primordial cycles. The 3 primordial auras are the 3 primordial auras of extreme yang, extreme yin, and neutral. The word cycle means a kind of secret technique. Qin, she said slowly. If I can absorb enough spiritual aura, I can temporarily break through my realm and reach the nascent soul realm. But this kind of nascent soul realm is only an illusion. It can only last for a very short period of time. The consequences are even more serious. It will make me fall back to the aura-refining realm in an instant. So that's how it is. Mo Tienga suddenly saw the light. No wonder Father could help him leave Demonic Mountain. No wonder he lost a lot of his cultivation and became an aura-refining disciple. When he was in Yunwu's sect, his cultivation probably really fell back to the aura-refining realm, right? Qin, she continued. When your father found out about this, he thought about it for 2 days and told me that his injury wouldn't heal anyway. That being the case, he was willing to use his cultivation to help me get out of trouble, but I had to promise to take care of his descendants on his behalf. I promised and even swore on my heart demon. In the darkness, his gaze swept over her, and he said softly, "At that time, I didn't care at all. It was only a trivial matter. But I didn't expect it would be you." That was all he said, but it was enough to make people's imaginations roam. It would be her. What? What did he mean by that? The darkness and silence almost made her blurt out the question. But in the next moment, the devil aura gradually dispersed and light shone in again. He turned his head and his voice became cold again. "All right, let's continue." Chapter 281. The two of them cautiously went out through the gap, stepped on the flying cloud again, and used several layers of defense to fly up slowly. Right at that moment, they suddenly heard an eagle's cry. The two of them turned their heads and were both shocked. Not far away, between the turbulent spiritual aura and devil aura, a swift figure flitted past. When they took a closer look, they realized it was a giant horned eagle. A 6th-rank demonic beast. Qin, she frowned. The sword formation formed by the 3 yang real fire swords shone, and the flying cloud descended. "There's more than one over there." Mo Tinga pointed in another direction, high up in the sky. There were also 3 giant eagles in the 6th rank flying there. One 6th-rank demonic beast was fine, but there were 4 in total. 6th-rank demonic beasts were equivalent to middle-stage core formation realm cultivators. Moreover, they were in midair, surrounded by drifting restrictions and gales, as well as lightning surging with spiritual aura and devil aura. Mo Tienga felt cold sweat all over her forehead. Qin, she was still very calm. The flying cloud continued to descend. The single giant eagle screeched again. They immediately felt the attention of the 4 giant eagles on them. The eagles screeched at each other a few times before flapping their wings and flying towards them. They came with bad intentions. Upon realizing this, Mo Tienga took out several magic weapons, including the magic weapons and spiritual talismans Lord Daoist Jinga gave her. In midair, the giant eagles living here had an absolute advantage. Even if their cultivation levels were higher and they had more tricks up their sleeves, they would fall from here if they weren't careful. They'd been flying for almost a day. If they fell from here, they'd definitely die without a burial place. In the blink of an eye, the giant eagles arrived. They were as fast as lightning, and their flying speed was really amazing. She was still controlling the flying cloud to descend. When he saw the giant horned eagles pouncing on him, spiritual light gathered in his right hand, and the true form of the three-yong real fire sword appeared in his hand. He only had time to lift it up, and the sword aura collided with the eagle's claws. His power! Emotinga's face turned pale. The demonic beast on Demonic Mountain had indeed mutated. How could a sixth-ranked demonic beast have such powerful power outside Demonic Mountain? Emotinga didn't have much time to think because another giant eagle crashed into them. She took out an Earth Element Square Seal and was about to use it, but she stopped her. It's not convenient to use magic weapons here. If you make too much noise, it'll cause the restrictions to collapse. Emotinga was dumbfounded. She once again repelled the giant eagle. At this time, the flying cloud had already descended to the place where they were hiding. He pushed Emotinga and said, "Go in." Emotinga didn't listen immediately. She looked outside and saw that the four giant eagles were continuously ramming into them. She was worried about these restrictions, so he didn't attack them. Instead, he just used the sword formation formed by the sword aura of the three-yong real fire sword to block them. However, the strength of these giant eagles was too great, and they cleverly attacked him in batches. He was completely in a passive state of defense. "I can help. Don't talk nonsense." She didn't even look at her. His gaze moved back and forth between the several giant eagles. "Quickly go inside. Do you have a way?" This time, he didn't even answer. He pushed her away and used his body to block the gap. With his actions, she had no choice but to go in. She had no choice but to carefully climb in. Just as she was about to pull him in, he withdrew his hand. "Senior Marshal Brother." Emotinga was rather anxious. "Aren't you coming in?" She didn't answer. He made a sword art with both hands, and the sword formation suddenly shone brightly. Under the covetous gaze of the four giant eagles, how could he have time to go inside? Emotinga couldn't see what was happening outside, so she could only use her divine sense to observe. The four giant eagles whistled again, and one by one, they charged towards him one by one. He didn't move, enduring the spiritual aura impact of those giant eagles. When the sword formation gathered enough spiritual aura, he waved his hand, and a red sword aura chased after one of the giant eagles. Attacking them one by one was the only way. Relying on its swift body technique, the eagle flapped its wings to dodge. Shinshi's sword light, indeed, couldn't reach the speed of this eagle. However, when the giant eagle thought it could easily dodge, it saw that the sword light turned in its direction and chased after it again. The giant eagle let out a shrill cry, and with a sharp whistling sound, the sword light struck its giant head. Blood splattered everywhere, feathers fluttered in the air, and a giant eagle fell from the cliff. Emotinga was about to breathe a sigh of relief, but her divine sense immediately sensed that the other three giant eagles rushed over together. "Watch out!" She shouted a warning, but she had just consumed a lot of spiritual aura, so he couldn't react in time. Almost out of instinct, Emotinga activated the soul-refining art and lashed out. She didn't know what the situation outside was like. She only felt pain from her divine sense being broken, and she spat out a mouthful of blood. Her whole body almost fell into a daze in an instant. Her divine sense was severed. It took her a long time to realize what had happened to her. "Behave. Don't move." She turned around and glared at her. But right at that moment, the three giant eagles she blocked attacked again. They flapped their 6 wings at the same time and pounced on him. She hastily raised his hand. The three-yong real fire sword blocked the attack from the front, but it didn't block the one behind him. After several attacks, just now, the already shaky defensive cover cracked as soon as it came into contact with the eagle's wings. The eagle's claws pierced his back, causing a string of blood to blossom. His body swayed, and blood immediately gushed out of his back. She clenched his teeth, but he didn't care. He took out a defensive talisman from his waist and patted it on his body, forming a defensive cover again. Tinga only saw that he was injured, but she couldn't see the situation outside. Without thinking too much, she unfolded the white silk handkerchief and wrapped it around his whole body. This time, he finally didn't refuse her help. He had seen the power of this defensive magic weapon with his own eyes. Although it couldn't block all attacks, it could at least relieve a lot of pressure on him. Nevertheless, he still said, "If you consume too much spiritual aura, take it back." Tinga was stunned for a moment before she answered in a low voice. In her heart, she had already made up her mind. She couldn't do too many things here, but this was the only thing she could do. With the protection of the white silk handkerchief, she finally felt a bit more relaxed. However, he couldn't take care of the injury on his back, which kept bleeding. There were a lot of wandering restrictions in this place, and spiritual aura and devil aura were intertwining. For fear of causing the restrictions to collapse, he didn't dare to use other magic weapons and could only use the sword formation to fight against the double-headed eagle with his exquisite control of sword aura. He couldn't hold on for too long like this. This thought flashed across his mind. Not to mention the restrictions and gales. If the devil aura drifted over like before, it would be more than enough for him to bear. He turned his head to look at Tinga inside the cave. The three giant eagles became even more indignant because of their companion's death, so they chased after him again. She sighed softly. He swung his hand, and the three-yong real fire sword once again turned into a red light that revolved around him. He closed his eyes and clasped his palms, completely ignoring the attacks of the three giant eagles. Because they saw their companion's death, these three giant eagles were full of hatred towards him, so their attacks became more and more crazy. The three spiritual auras heavily hit the defensive cover, and Tinga felt her meridians go numb. Even though the white silk handkerchief's defense was amazing, such a powerful attack consumed a lot of spiritual aura. She immediately swallowed a lot of high-grade restorative panaceas. Without pausing for long, the three giant eagles once again rammed into her. This time, Tinga couldn't control the white silk handkerchief anymore. The mist condensed and turned back into the white silk handkerchief, no longer able to maintain its defensive shape. For the third time, she withstood the attacks of the three giant eagles. He was injured just now, and after so many spiritual aura collisions, the defensive sword formation on his body already had a gap. Even the spiritual light protecting him was shaking and on the verge of shattering. Now, after being rammed by the three giant eagles, he almost fell down. Tinga was extremely anxious. She couldn't care about anything else and used the soul-refining art again. These giant eagles probably grew up in this special environment. They weren't afraid of gales, restrictions, devil aura, or mutated divine sense. When she used the soul-refining art just now, although one of them was injured, she herself was seriously injured. However, she could see that she was casting some kind of spell, so she had to block it for him. Otherwise, he would probably be seriously injured before he could cast it. The three giant eagles rammed into her again. The outermost sword formation buzzed and bounced off some of the attacks, but they all broke apart. Then, they rammed into her divine sense. In an instant, Tinga once again tasted the pain of her divine sense being torn apart. This kind of pain was more intense than any physical pain. It was as if her head had been ruthlessly knocked and her brain would burst in the next moment. Nevertheless, she managed to block this attack in the end. Nevertheless, she knew she wouldn't be able to take care of it next time. Not to mention the fact that she'd just advanced to the core formation realm, so she didn't have enough magic weapons and methods. Even if she had magic weapons, she still wouldn't dare to use them because he said if she used magic weapons here, it might cause the restrictions to collapse. The dizziness in her head slowly disappeared. She opened her eyes and saw a bright light outside. Chi's body was wrapped in a dazzling white light. She saw a white bead flashing in his dantian. Although she'd never seen it before, Tinga knew it was definitely that yang spiritual bead. The yang spiritual aura surged, causing the yin spiritual aura inside her body to become restless. Under the light of the yang spiritual bead, the three giant eagles seemed to have no idea what it was. They glided in the air and didn't dare to approach for a while. Their demonic beast instincts told them that this was definitely a dangerous thing. Therefore, one of them screeched. The three giant eagles once again flapped their wings, wrapped in spiritual aura, and charged towards she together. Demonic beast attacks were this simple. They had innately sharp claws and teeth, and their bodies were like weapons. Such a simple attack was enough to give cultivators headaches. Spiritual aura converged, and the white light gently blocked the three giant eagles' attacks, as if it didn't require any effort at all. Soon after, the white light spread and completely wrapped the three giant eagles. These eagles didn't know what was happening. They flapped their wings in the thick yang spiritual aura, wanting to fly away. However, the yang spiritual aura firmly wrapped them, making them unable to move. Gradually, they couldn't even flap their wings. The red sword light once again shone brightly, and the sword formation reformed. Amid the giant eagle's panicked cries, it slowly stabbed towards them. Puff, puff! They were pierced by the sword aura and fell down from the cliff. Seeing your martial brother, Tinga's eyes and hands were quick. She grabbed Shi, who was about to fall, and pulled him in with difficulty. Chapter 282. After an unknown amount of time, Shi woke up from his coma. The narrow space and the dim light. There was a large mass of devil aura outside the cave. Fortunately, there was a layer of defense that blocked the devil aura outside. His body felt heavy. He looked down and saw Tinga sitting motionlessly next to him. Her head was tilted and leaning against his body. Their palms were intertwined, making him feel cold and soft. His back was burning with pain. It was the wound caused by the giant eagle's tearing. But he also felt it was soft. He reached out to touch it. It turned out she put a shirt on it. What's going on? Why do I feel like I'm hurt badly? Tinga, he called softly and pushed her. Tinga didn't move. He had a bad feeling. He reached out to feel her pulse and was stunned. Her meridians were empty. He suddenly realized what had happened and immediately moved the spiritual aura in his body. Sure enough, his dantian and meridians were intact, and his spiritual aura was also abundant. The only difference was that there was a lot of yin spiritual aura in the depths of his dantian, mixing with a neutral aura. After a while, she regained his composure. Almost every time he used the yang spiritual bead, his body would become extremely weak, and he would need a very long time to recover. Therefore, he rarely used the yang spiritual bead because he didn't have complete preparations. After using it, his life would be in danger. But this time, because of her, he didn't even suffer any internal injuries. She was now in the core formation realm. Even if the spiritual aura difference between the early stage and the peak stage of the core formation realm was huge, the spiritual aura in her body was enough to heal him. Therefore, his dantian and meridians were able to recover in a short time. After sitting in a daze for a long time, he slowly recovered. The cave was very small. Sitting side by side, they could barely move. In order to heal him, she almost curled up into a ball. But even if she wasn't tall and thin, it was still very difficult for her to hold such a position. He thought for a moment, laid her flat, and turned sideways to try to heal her. The wound on his back would hurt if he moved it, so he endured it. But he couldn't finish it. Although he wasn't strong, he was much taller. Not to mention sitting up, it was difficult for him to even turn around. After a long time, he could only lean forward and barely hover over her. When he was about to transfer spiritual aura to her, he suddenly realized that he looked like he was taking advantage of her. After realizing this, his face became a bit hot, and he couldn't of it. Of course, he couldn't do it anymore. After thinking for a while, he could only sit back and put his right palm on her Lingtai acupoint, slowly transferring spiritual aura. The best acupoints to transfer spiritual aura were the Shanzhong acupoint on the chest and the Lingtai acupoint on the back. Of the Lingtai acupoint on of her back, of energy. The moment the acupoint of spiritual aura acupoint of Lin of was of spiritual energy of yin of yang of the five elements of energy circulated of energy of spiritual energy of spiritual energy energy of energy of energy of her. However, this kind of uncontrollable flow was extremely smooth. When his yang spiritual aura entered her body, Yin's spiritual aura almost immediately gathered in her meridians. The five elements of yin and yang circulated endlessly. He knew her divine sense was injured, but he was powerless to do anything about it. He had never heard that divine sense could be used to heal injuries. It could only be slowly nurtured in one sea of knowledge. He shook his head, stopped transferring spiritual aura, and continued to sit side by side. But on second thought, he felt this wasn't good. He took out a piece of clothing from his chinquan bag and put it on her back. But on second thought, he felt this wasn't good. So he took out a piece of clothing from his chinquan bag and put it on her back. The stones around them were very hard, so it should be more comfortable. The pain on his back became more severe. He knew he had lost a lot of blood, but this place was too narrow. He couldn't even take off his clothes in such a small space, let alone treat his wound. Thinking about it, he could only give up. In any case, for cultivators, it was only a small injury and wouldn't kill them. But because he lost a lot of blood, experienced a thrilling battle, and lost a lot of spiritual aura just now, his mind couldn't help but become muddled. Soon, he fell asleep again. Mo Tinga opened her eyes. She felt warm all over, almost making her want to stretch. But before she could do that, her head bumped into something. She screamed in pain and was about to cover her aching head when she heard a very gentle voice. "What's wrong?" Then a pair of hands wrapped around her, lifted her head, looked at her, and scolded. "How could you be so careless? Do you have any self-awareness as a cultivator? You're in a daze." She didn't wake up, so of course she was in a daze. She didn't say this because she felt the current situation was very strange. In fact, she wasn't in a daze very often. Most of the time, she was very sober and calm. Why did he always see her when she was in a daze? Her mind was in a mess. She shook her head to get rid of these inexplicable thoughts. Mo Tinga's eyes shifted as she recalled what happened before. They were attacked by a giant eagle on the cliff and were injured, so they stayed in this place to heal their injuries. But what's with his current attitude? "Senior, Martial Brother Shojing?" she asked in a low voice. "What?" His voice sounded a bit unhappy, but his face didn't show it. Then he asked, "How are your injuries? Have you recovered your spiritual aura?" Spiritual aura? She immediately tried to circulate her spiritual aura, but she was stunned. She was a bit nervous when he saw her appearance. "Is there a problem?" Mo Tinga shook her head, still in a daze. No, not only was there no problem, but she had never felt so good. Originally, there was only a small amount of yang spiritual aura in her body, but now it almost formed a cycle around her gold core. No matter how stupid she was, she knew what happened. She transferred her spiritual aura to him to heal his injuries, and after he recovered, he transferred it back to her. Not only was there no loss of spiritual aura, but it also triggered the spiritual aura cycle in their bodies. She suddenly understood why her master was so keen on matchmaking them. It wasn't because he wanted to be a matchmaker, but because their cultivation techniques and their spiritual aura attributes would definitely complement each other if they performed dual cultivation. However, when she realized this, she felt very unhappy. Was it just because their dual cultivation was beneficial to each other? Your dantian and meridians are fine, but what about your divine sense? Hearing his question, she felt a headache again. She supported her head with her hand and shook her head. My divine sense was injured a bit badly. She nodded. He wasn't surprised at all. He said, Although the soul refining art is a good technique for winning by surprise, its shortcomings are also very fatal. You have to be careful when using it in the future. She answered softly. In the past, when she used the soul refining art, she could even defeat those stronger than her. But this time, because of the special environment in which these giant eagles grew, she was the one who was injured. Now, her body was completely fine, but the injury to her divine sense would take at least several years to recover. By the way, Senior Marshal Brother, how are your injuries? He nodded and said with a smile, I'm fine. I have to thank you. It's nothing. The two of them weren't used to polite words of thanks, so they stopped talking. Tinga felt like she forgot something. After thinking for a while, she suddenly remembered when she saw the bloodstains on his clothes. By the way, Senior Marshal Brother, the injury on your back. She reached out, wanted to push him away from the rock wall, and look at it. She struggled, but he was unwilling to move. He just smiled and said, It's nothing. How could it be nothing? Tinga ignored him and continued to push him. There's so much blood, and you can't handle it yourself. Don't worry, I'll be very gentle. No. Before he could finish, Tinga persistently interrupted him. Senior Marshal Brother. Seeing her raised eyebrows, he couldn't say anything and could only go along with her. Tinga pushed him, making him sit with his back facing her. Sure enough, the wound was badly mutilated. She frowned and tried to tear the clothes on his back, but Xianqing School's clothes were spirit tools or magic tools, so it was very difficult to tear them. She had no choice but to reach out to untie his belt. This movement was very natural, so Tinga didn't feel anything was wrong. Qin, on the other hand, stiffened. He felt her hand going around his waist from behind, feeling around his waist, trying to untie his belt. However, their clothes had long been tangled together, so she couldn't untie them no matter how hard she tried. After a while, she stretched her head, wanting to see what was going on, but in the next moment, her hand was pressed down. What? Before she could finish her words, she suddenly stopped. This doesn't seem right. His hand was pressing down on her. To understand the relationship between the belt and her waist, she wrapped her arms around his waist. With this press, her whole body was pressed against his back. Silence. Breathing. In this narrow space, they could only hear each other's breathing and heartbeats. The howling gales outside couldn't pass through the gap, making it seem distant and unreal. Only the two of them could be seen. Tinga felt her hand was very hot. The place she pressed against his waist was very hot, and the back of her hand, covered by his hand, was also very hot. She felt this was wrong and wanted to pull her hand back, but his grip became tighter and tighter. Tinga. After a long time, she heard Qinshi's voice. His voice was trembling, but it carried a water-like gentleness that she had never heard before. Her heart beat wildly. She wanted to wait for something, but she also felt she couldn't wait any longer and wanted to escape. Should I answer? She thought like this, but she couldn't even find her own voice. Qinshi finally moved. He separated her hands, but didn't let go. Then, with the friction of their clothes, he gently turned around. This place was too narrow, and the places he could turn were very limited. Therefore, after he turned around, he was almost pressed against her body. Tinga felt she couldn't breathe. She struggled to step back, wanting to be a bit farther away. But in the next moment, he still leaned against her. He finally let go of her hand, but he wrapped his arms around her waist. There was nowhere to retreat, a cold kiss. It happened so suddenly and so naturally. Her eyes were wide open as if she couldn't believe what had happened. Their faces were so close, and their breaths were intertwined, and the cold and soft touch on her lips. It was a completely unfamiliar feeling. She must be dreaming. She must be. But her eyes opened wider and wider until she heard his helpless sigh. Then her eyes were covered. From her lips to her breath, everything became hot. Chapter 283. She must be dreaming. Maybe when she woke up, she'd find that she fell asleep cultivating in the virtual sky world. But could she fall asleep while cultivating? As a core formation cultivator, could she fall asleep while cultivating? Then it must be an illusion. It must be an illusion. She hypnotized herself for a long time, but when she opened her eyes, she still saw the rock wall and that face. She wasn't dreaming. She pushed the person next to her away, ignoring the sound of him hitting the rock wall. In any case, a core formation cultivator wouldn't die even if he hit the rock wall. She picked up the things around her, wanting to throw them at him, but there was nothing around her. Where could she find anything? She put her hand into her chinkuan bag and smashed whatever she touched. Tinga. She didn't stop. She still picked up things and smashed them mindlessly. If she didn't smash them, she wouldn't be able to bear it in the next moment. Oh! A low cry of pain entered her ears. She finally stopped, gasping for breath as she stared at the person who was so close to her no matter how she pushed. Seeing that she stopped, she put down the sleeve covering his face and said helplessly, "Hit my wound." Tinga calmed down and remembered the bloody and untreated wound on his back. With a cold expression, she said, "Turn around." He paused for a moment. His clothes rubbed against each other, so he obediently turned around. "Take off your clothes." Although he knew she meant he should take off his clothes to heal his wound, she still couldn't help but let his imagination run wild. He then untied his belt and took off his robe. Behind him, Tinga very rudely took off his robe and looked at his wound under the dim sky. That giant eagle's claws were very sharp, so the wound on his back was very deep. Since he hit the rock wall just now, the blood that had already coagulated started to seep out again. Tinga put her hand into her chinkuan bag, but she couldn't find what she wanted no matter how hard she searched. Remembering that she lost a lot of medicinal pill bottles, she could only lower her head and search around. With great difficulty, she finally found a jade bottle. She pulled out the cork, poured the cold medicinal liquid into her palm, and directly patted it on his wound with a vengeful heart. He didn't cry out, but the muscles near the wound trembled, allowing her to enjoy the pleasure of revenge. This revenge made his mood much better. Next, he carefully cleaned his wound with medicinal liquid, sprinkled some medicinal powder, and cast a small healing spell to make the wound not look so terrible. Finally, he used a small flying sword to cut off the clothes he had taken off and used it to bandage the wound. After doing all this, Tinga once again felt something was amiss. In a narrow space with a half-naked man beside her, and not long ago, this man had done such a thing to her. So she thought for a moment and said, "Put on your clothes." He touched his nose, turned sideways, and said innocently, "You tore my clothes." Tinga was dumbfounded. She couldn't help but feel angry again. However, when she recalled his wound, she forcefully swallowed her anger and said angrily in a low voice, "Do you only have this one set of clothes?" Of course it was impossible. They weren't mortals. If a chinkuan bag could store so many things, couldn't it store a few clothes? He had no choice but to take out his clothes from his chinkuan bag, then said, "But I can't wear it with you tied up like this." Tinga glared at him. "Give it to me." She took his clothes and roughly helped him put them on. His naked skin was unconsciously brushed against. At first, her heart was filled with a nameless fire. Her heart was filled with anger. But in the end, it turned into awkwardness. She had lived for more than 80 years. Among mortals, her current age would make her an old lady. However, she was a cultivator who immersed herself in cultivation and had never experienced such a thing. She recalled the past 80 years. Only when she was young did she often see boys swimming in the river by the village. But those were all children. Fortunately, this process didn't take long. She quickly put on his clothes and finally fastened the belt. "Done," she said, and was about to retreat. But in the next moment, someone grabbed her waist. She couldn't kneel anymore and fell forward, falling into his arms. She struggled to get up, but his arms tightened, making it impossible for her to struggle. He was a head taller than her, so she couldn't even struggle to free her head from his embrace. Her whole body was submerged in his embrace. Her anger, which had already faded, flared up again, so she opened her mouth and fiercely bit his chest. This kind of bite only made him groan, so she couldn't bite anymore and let go of him. The tears she originally thought would never come fell little by little. What the hell is going on? What does he want to do? He's so cold to me one moment, but he's like this the next. He's always so good that she can't help but misunderstand, but his words can make people freeze. One moment, he's Qin Shi, the next moment, he's Qin Shoujing. She clearly recognized him as Qin Shoujing and buried her feelings for Qin Shi in the depths of her heart. But as Qin Shoujing, Qin Shoujing, what do you want? She wiped away her tears little by little and asked calmly, "Didn't you say you don't covet anything from me? What are you doing now?" He was silent for a long time, but he didn't let go of her. After a while, he said slowly, "I want to ask you, what do you mean by that?" He clasped her waist and lifted her up, not allowing her to escape even for a moment. "Am I Qin Shi or Qin Shoujing? What's the difference in meaning? Why don't you say it?" he asked. "I ended my closed-door meditation for you, went out to find medicine for you, and in the end, I almost lost half my life. Why do you say that to me?" Not answering, he pressed his lips against hers and bit her, bit by bit, as if he was kissing and biting. Then he shouted between her teeth, "What do I want? Why don't you ask me what you want?" This time, he didn't let her answer. Her waist was tightly held by him, and it wasn't a gentle kiss like before. Instead, it was close to biting and devouring. He never knew he was such a violent person, but at this moment, his heart was filled with the desire to destroy her. He didn't want her to escape, didn't want her to say those hurtful words, and didn't want to see her distant eyes. He trapped her by his side, making her unable to move and unable to hurt him with her seemingly unintentional but indifferent eyes. Normally, the sex robes couldn't be torn, but she didn't know what kind of technique he used, but it was almost completely torn. In this narrow space, she couldn't even struggle, let alone he was holding her waist so hard and wrapping her wrists. His ice-cold hands went under the hem of the robe, slid all the way, and finally grasped her smooth skin, bringing her uneasy pain. But she couldn't say anything. His kiss never stopped. Their breathing was messy. The narrow space brought about a cramped depression. The sudden passion burned them like fire and drowned them like water. Mo Tienga struggled to float up from the water. Although this kind of feeling was intoxicating, she instinctively felt that she should stop. Because of that, she finally managed to free her hand and ruthlessly swung it, hitting his face with a paw. There was silence. "Let me go," she said in a suppressed voice. Qin Shi was silent for a long time, but in the end, he let go. "I'm sorry." His apology made Mo Tienga unable to restrain herself. She suddenly grabbed his collar and tightly restrained him. "What are you sorry for? What do you think you have to apologize for?" "I apologize for my behavior." His voice finally regained its calmness, but then he said, "But what I said wasn't false. I don't need to apologize for it." He continued, "I really don't understand what kind of woman you are. You're usually like a man and refuse to admit defeat, but you're timid in the face of love. You're always doing hurtful things and saying hurtful things. I also don't know what kind of man you are. One moment you say this, and the next moment you do that." His words ignited her anger, and Mo Tienga almost couldn't control her temper. "You said you did it for me? But for more than 30 years, you avoided me and never thought about confessing your identity to me. Even if I knew, you didn't give me any explanation. Yes, I knew you were Qin Shoujing, and I didn't care about deceiving you, but you didn't say anything. Did you think it was natural? Did you think you didn't need to explain it all?" "I don't say it," she shouted, pushing back, and continued to grab onto his collar. "Back then, you clearly knew that I had feelings for senior brother Qin, so you kept your distance. I'm not an idiot, so I didn't have any delusions either. I'm also a cultivator, and I also want to walk the great Tao of immortality. I can control and endure feelings, but you're always changing. When you're good, you treat me very well, but after a while, you avoid me. During the demonic beast riot, you came to save me. Do you know how touched I was? I think you have a little bit of feelings for me, don't you? Can I look forward to it? But as soon as we came out, you treated me like that. Yes, I know my cultivation level is much lower than yours, and I'm just a small cultivator to you. I'm not even worth a glance from you. But if you look down on me, why are you so considerate, so gentle?" She lowered her head, controlling her trembling lips so that he wouldn't see it. "I guess you were Chin Shojing. I know I'm being paranoid, but I also know that if you had any bad intentions, you didn't have to treat me like that. So I told myself maybe you had your reasons. Since you didn't say anything, I would still treat you as Senior Marshal Brother Chin and treat you like before. But in the end, after the demonic beast riot ended, I came back alive. It was so difficult to see you again, but you pretended you didn't see me. You looked down on me. I didn't look down on you. I never said, but your attitude was like that." She shouted at him in an even louder voice. "You watched me walk towards you, but you didn't even look at me. You just turned around and walked away. Yes, my cultivation level is very low. Is it very shameful for me to become your junior marshal sister? But in the beginning, you were the one who made Master accept me as a disciple. No, don't deny it," she said loudly, even somewhat hysterically. "At that time, I understood. You're not Senior Marshal Brother Chin. You're Chin Shojing. I'm indebted to you, but you're separated from me by tens of thousands of mountains and rivers. You're a high and aloof senior." "You said I hurt you?" "Chin Shojing, Taoist Master Shojing, Senior Marshal Brother Shojing, on what basis do you think you could turn around and walk away when you don't like me? But after you've done what you want, you can turn around and look at me? I'd like to ask you, what do you think I am? One moment you're cold and heartless. The next you're filled with tenderness. At that time, you turned around and walked away, avoiding me for 35 years. What do you want me to think? I don't want to think I'm sentimental anymore." Chapter 284. It was just a turn of his back, but it turned out that it hurt her so much. He never thought about it. Perhaps even she herself never thought about it. She was Chin Shojing. When she realized this, she tried to accept it, but he used an indifferent attitude to reject her approach. Therefore, she firmly believed that Chin Shojing wasn't Chin Shi. But this inference was completely wrong. Why did he do that back then? Because he had a little bit of a good impression of her, but his self-esteem was hurt by those two deification cultivators. He rejected her approach because his pointless self-esteem was hurt, and also because, at that time, he didn't have that many feelings for her. That's because, this time, she gave him time, but he couldn't say it. Because at that time, they didn't have such deep feelings for each other. Even if this was the truth, if he said it out loud, there really wouldn't be any hope left. Apart from this, what else could he say? He wasn't a liar, and he definitely wasn't a person who spoke sweet words. He was clumsy with his words, and the words he said were always true. He only did something like deceiving someone once, and it was only that one time. Now, he already paid the price for it. For a long time, she didn't answer, so her expression gradually turned into a sneer. "Can't say it?" He turned his head, not knowing how to face her gaze. "You're always like this. You give me the wrong impression, then back away, leaving me to struggle in the whirlpool alone. When I climb up, you want to pull me down again. I form my gold core, so I'm indifferent to it. If you ignore me, my feelings will probably slowly die. But why do you still have to provoke me? Chin Shojing, you just know I love you." When she shouted these words, even she herself didn't realize how wrong she was. In this life, she lost too many things, so she wasn't afraid to lose them. However, she hated this feeling of not being able to have them and not being able to let them go. When she formed her gold core, she calmly dealt with this feeling. If it weren't for his faintly discernible teasing during this period of time, maybe after a few more years, this feeling would have really disappeared. But he didn't let her go. Along the way, he seemed to be both affectionate and heartless. One moment he was too nice to her, and the next moment he was cold. He didn't seduce her as openly as Jing Xingji did. If he did, perhaps her remaining feelings for him would have disappeared without a trace. He just stood at a distance that seemed to be far, yet close at the same time. She couldn't get close to him, couldn't leave him, and couldn't bear to part with him. "Can't say it?" Tinga calmed down and stopped him just as he was about to speak. The emotions that had been accumulating for several decades were vented out, but there was no response. She raised her head and looked at him with a bit of arrogance. Then there's no need to say anything else. I've reached the core formation realm, and I'll continue on my path to the nascent soul realm. Today's matter ends here. I don't want to hear any more excuses. Please keep your distance from me. No. How could he stop now? Especially after what she said. Tinga, she couldn't retreat any further, so she could only turn her back to him. If she couldn't see his face, perhaps she wouldn't be soft-hearted anymore. But his arms wrapped around her from behind. The gap was so narrow that she couldn't break free at all. His breath was right next to her ear, carrying uncontrollable excitement. How can I keep my distance from you? You said you loved me, so what? She sneered. Didn't you already know? I didn't know. He forcibly turned her body around. I knew you had a good impression of the former senior martial brother Chin, but I didn't know how deep your feelings were. I thought. He was so excited that he was a bit incoherent. Since you can form your gold core, you're definitely no longer, at least not that much. After saying a bunch of nonsense, he became serious again and asked seriously, why can you form your gold core? Mo Tinga was stunned. She was furious. What do you mean, why can I form my gold core? Are you going to be happy if I can't form my gold core? Of course not. She was so anxious that he didn't know what to say. But, I can't form my nascent soul. I thought of a lot of methods, medicinal pills, mental cultivation, even letting Master use a secret technique to enter my sea of knowledge. But I always failed on the verge of success. It doesn't make sense that you can. What does it have to do with me that you can't form your nascent soul? She became even angrier. Let go. No. I'd be an idiot if I still let go after you said so. Master will definitely beat me to death if he finds out. You wait a minute. He calmed down a bit. Let me think about what to say. No matter how he thought about it, he still didn't know what to say. Therefore, in the end, she gave up. Forget it. I'll start from the beginning. From now on, you're not allowed to speak. Why should I? Tinga angrily opened her mouth to bite him, but she didn't give her a chance. He clasped her chin and bit her tongue to stop her from speaking. After a long time, he finally ended this entanglement. Her breathing was unstable. She finally managed to catch her breath. He stopped her between her teeth. I told you from now on, you're not allowed to speak. If you want to speak, then neither of us needs to say anything. Mo Tinga felt something was wrong. Why did it seem like she was being led by the nose by him? But if she didn't listen to him, it seemed like she couldn't. Seeing her confused expression, she couldn't help but laugh. He combed her messy long hair and said softly, "Listen to me, okay?" She hesitated for a while, but eventually acquiesced. It seemed she had no choice but to acquiesce. I admit, in the beginning, I didn't have any feelings for you. I just thought it was good to be she and get along with you. At that time, if I became Shojing again, you'd definitely stay away from me. Besides, you're so paranoid. If it was Shojing who saved you, would you still be so close to me? Mo Tinga didn't answer, but he got the answer from her expression. She smiled. You seem to always be afraid of power that surpasses your own. Maybe it's because it makes you feel unsafe. I can understand that guarding that kind of secret requires you to be careful in every aspect, but this kind of vigilance will make you reject all kinds of power you can't control. If I were Shojing, you definitely wouldn't trust me. Even if I saved you and took you back to Xianxing School, it would still be very difficult for you to have a sense of belonging to Xianxing School, right? Mo Tinga really wanted to refute him, but what he said seemed to be right. The first person she trusted was senior martial brother Chin. So when she came to Xianxing School, she slowly accepted this kind of life and found it wasn't that hard to trust the people around her. Even though she was disappointed in senior martial brother Chin later, Luo Fengxue, Yi Jingwen, martial uncle Xianin, her master. These people made her feel that trust wasn't that scary. Senior martial brother Chin wasn't the whole reason, but he was the first reason. Of course, it was because I also liked this kind of feeling. I felt that in front of you, being a little cultivator in the same realm as me was much easier. I could say some things and do some things without any scruples. At that time, she really felt that he was sincere and frank. He didn't hide anything, was frank, fair, and clean, but then there was the demonic beast riot. Chin, she said. I don't know how to explain this matter to you, but I can tell you that I wasn't in a good mood at that time because I wasn't targeting you. He wasn't targeting me, but he still had that dead face. Emo Tinga said angrily, hey, I told you, you're not allowed to talk about it now. Emo Tinga shut her mouth even more angrily. Maybe you don't know something happened. He took a deep breath. For the first time, he planned to tell her about this matter. Did you notice that I was seriously injured when I came out of the 2 Deification Seniors virtual sky world? Emo Tinga thought about it and nodded. Although he didn't say it explicitly, she could see it with her eyes. Chin, she smiled, somewhat self-deprecatingly. In fact, it was because inside the virtual sky world that Senior Yuan Bao said I had a yang spiritual bead and was suitable to practice his cultivation technique. So he tortured me. Faced with Emo Tinga's questioning gaze, he had no choice but to tell her the truth. He made me eat a lot of strange things and used a lot of inexplicable methods, almost torturing me until I was half dead. It was precisely because of this that I was seriously injured. He said it was to transform my body, to make me infinitely close to a pure yang constitution, so I could become your human furnace. By the end, he was almost silent. Emo Tinga widened her eyes and finally spoke. Human furnace? His face turned slightly red and he looked away. He said, although I wasn't born with a pure yang constitution, I have metal and fire spiritual roots, both of which are the yang attribute. I also fused with the yang spiritual bead. After his transformation, as long as I slowly cultivate his pure yang technique, I'll become the same as a pure yang constitution. In that case, being your human furnace can help you cultivate faster. Emo Tinga kept staring at him, almost not daring to believe what she heard. Human furnace? She had always been afraid that she would be forced to become a human furnace because of her constitution. In the end, he was also afraid to become her human furnace. What was this? He felt very uncomfortable under her gaze. I admit, Senior Yuan Bao's words were too much of a blow to me. So as soon as I came out, I was in a hurry to go back to heal my injuries and enter closed-door meditation, so I could advance to the nascent soul realm as soon as possible. Because of this, I also vented my anger on you. Emo Tinga was speechless for a long time. She originally thought she would still feel angry no matter what reason he gave, but this reason was too ridiculous. It was so ridiculous that she couldn't even speak and didn't even have the strength to get angry. Tinga, he said nervously, are you laughing at me? After being silent for a long time, she nodded expressionlessly. Yes, I'm laughing at you. Sure enough. He sighed and laughed at himself. I know it's ridiculous, but I don't think you understand how humiliating this is for me. I don't understand, she said. In the next moment, she grabbed his collar and gnashed her teeth. But I know you've been deceived. Chapter 285. Chin, she was dumbfounded and grabbed her hand. What do you mean I was deceived? Emo Tinga sneered. 2 disrespectful old men. When they left, they didn't want to see me again. What human furnace are you talking about? How is that possible? If those 2 old men weren't going to come back, it was impossible for them to capture him as a human furnace for Emo Tinga. Chin, she was completely petrified when he realized this. What? What was he doing all these years? Are you sure? He was doubtful. They really weren't going to come back. I'm sure, absolutely sure. Emo Tinga said angrily. At that time, I just built my foundation. Deification cultivators like them can casually enter closed-door meditation for thousands of years. Who knows if I'll still be alive when they come back? Only an idiot like you would believe that. Chin, she thought about it and felt something was wrong. But if that's the case, why do they have to transform my body? Emo Tinga continued to sneer. They're deification cultivators. Can't they play with little cultivators because they're bored? How dare you say I'm paranoid? They gave you benefits and deceived you. Fine, he was successfully deceived. Moreover, He was deceived for dozens of years and suffered for dozens of years. If those two old men knew this, they'd definitely be very proud. After thousands of years in the deification realm, did they go crazy from boredom? They obviously gave him benefits, but they acted like they were scheming against him. They didn't want his gratitude, but wanted to make him feel disgusted. He wasted dozens of years on this kind of thing. What on earth was he doing? After figuring this out, both of them were silent. One was speechless, and the other was gnashing her teeth. After a long time, she heard Qinxi's voice. Tiange. What? She asked fiercely. You cough. You what? You don't know how to say something? Qinxi didn't say anything. Instead, he reached out to grab a casually thrown underwear, put it on her, and carefully wrapped it up. At first, Tiange didn't know what he was doing, but as she watched his movements, she suddenly realized that her clothes were disheveled. The front of her robe was torn, and her undergarments were faintly discernible. She immediately swatted his hand away, then wrapped herself up and curled up into a ball. He didn't know if this feeling was called wanting more, but he was sure he was very disappointed. If he knew this, he wouldn't have reminded her. What are you looking at? He smiled as he leaned closer and whispered, You're blushing. Tiange was stunned. She grabbed her robe with one hand and randomly fumbled for something with her other hand before throwing it at him again. Tiange, even if he was a cultivator and couldn't smash people to death, but she was too violent. Why didn't he realize she was such a person in the past? She couldn't bear it anymore. He grabbed her hands and firmly pressed her against his chest. Don't move. Do you want to smash me to death? I'd rather smash you to death. Tiange struggled. If you think it's too troublesome, then die for me to see. This was simply unreasonable. Me what? Qin Shoujing, let go of me. You've gone too far today. Fine. It was a little too much, but if he hadn't confirmed her feelings, he wouldn't have. Are you going to let go or not? Unable to break free, she became more and more angry and pushed him away. She did manage to push him away, but he was pushed to the rock wall by her. He immediately let out a muffled groan and froze. She struggled out of his embrace. Seeing his sweaty appearance, she couldn't help but ask, What's wrong? After a long time, he finally showed a bleak smile. He wanted to raise his hand, but couldn't, so he could only frown and say, My back. His back was injured. Thinking of this, Tiange felt a bit regretful, but it was already too late. She could only ask, Can you move? He shook his head. Wait a minute. He waited for a while with cold sweat all over his body. When the pain seemed to have subsided a bit, he finally moved his body and turned his back. Tiange's heart trembled when she saw the back of his newly changed robe was bloody again. She then looked at the rock wall, which was also stained with a lot of blood. It was obvious that her push just now had caused his wound to split open. Take off your clothes, she said after a while. Qinxi obediently went to untie his belt, but his hands trembled for a long time and still couldn't lift them. He could only look at her helplessly and say, It hurts too much. Even moving my hand hurts. After pausing for a while, Tiange moved forward and lowered her head to untie his belt. This time, it was much smoother, but it was even more embarrassing. At that time, she only thought about treating his injury and didn't think about anything else. Now, she kissed him and hugged him. She lowered her head and didn't dare to look at his face. She only breathed a sigh of relief when she took off his clothes and didn't worry that he would see her face. Then she concentrated on treating his wound again. She untied his belt, and sure enough, his wound ruptured. She treated it as before and continued to help him change his clothes. During the whole process, she kept her head down and didn't say a word. When everything was done, she pretended that nothing had happened and started to clean up the medicine bottles she threw everywhere in the cave. Ahem! He was restless and wanted to attract her attention. What are you doing? If you still want your injury to get better, behave. I didn't. He said 2 words and then pulled her hand in a flattering manner. I haven't finished talking yet. What else do you want to say? And he didn't know where to start since he was interrupted. He hesitated for a long time and finally said, In short, Those 35 years. I just couldn't figure it out, so later on, you finally came back and entered the 10,000 laws of nature formation, but in the end, you injured your sea of consciousness. Only then did I realize that no matter what those two soul formation seniors said, my feelings for you always existed. Feelings? Tinga looked at him suspiciously. Do you have feelings for me? Why would you suspect that I don't have feelings for you? She was startled and asked back. How would I know you have feelings for me? Tinga was even more baffled. Did you tell me? Did I? Fine, no. But I made it very obvious, okay? Obvious? Where? I ended my closed-door meditation because I sensed something happened to you. Then, in order to wake you up quickly, I went out to look for medicine. I also brought you to Demonic Mountain. If it was someone else, I wouldn't have cared. What's with that expression? The expression that says you're an idiot. Tinga couldn't stand it anymore. Regardless of whether his wound was just bandaged or not, she slapped his hand away. Yes, the things you do always make me feel like you have feelings for me. But just as I thought that, you looked at me coldly and hinted that I shouldn't think too highly of myself. She was tongue-tied. I didn't mean that. Tinga continued to sneer. I don't care whether you did or not. That's what you meant. She still hadn't calmed down. She was being unreasonable. He took a deep breath and said, Fine, I'll tell you now. You misunderstood me. I actually think about you every day. I think about you even in my dreams. I miss you so much that I'm crazy. Do you understand now? What do you mean by not saying anything? She was anxious. He had never said this kind of thing in his life, and he didn't plan to say it again. Are you going back on your words again? What do you mean again? Tinga finally spoke. Aren't you? She said with some confusion. In the beginning, I indeed sensed that you had developed different feelings for me. But at that time, I thought you were a smart person who knew how to control yourself, so I didn't say anything. Later, I figured it out and came out of closed-door meditation, but you coldly turned around and left. Master told me you needed time to accept it, so I didn't disturb you and just thought of a way to form my nascent soul. But more than 10 years passed, and you still didn't look for me. Right after that, you formed your gold core. If you really had feelings for me, why could you form your gold core? Say something. Tinga resisted the urge to slap him again. She clenched her teeth and said, Why couldn't I form my gold core? If you didn't say anything, how would I know you really did it for me? Maybe it was just because my father entrusted you to go out and look for medicine for me, but you just didn't expect the consequences to be so serious. She was speechless. He didn't say anything because he thought his actions were enough to make her understand. Unfortunately, she was afraid of misunderstanding and didn't dare to think highly of herself, so she never understood. After a long time, he continued to ask, What about you? What were you thinking? What did I think? If you didn't want it, I didn't dare to force you. You wholeheartedly wanted to form your nascent soul. So why should I be so stubborn? I couldn't form my nascent soul because of you, but you didn't dare to force me. She couldn't help but question her. How would I know? Tinga lowered her head. Although she didn't want to admit defeat, her tone was weak. You never told me. You never told me either. She said. You even called me an idiot. You're not that smart. If you didn't refuse to say anything, I would have thought you already had no feelings for me. You said I didn't say anything, but not only did you say nothing, but you also didn't ask anything. Tinga's anger flared again, but he was injured, so she could only turn her anger into words. Why do I have to say everything and ask everything? You're a fickle and messy person, yet you still want me to understand everything? I'm not so smart that I can see what's going on in your head. You're unreasonable. You're the unreasonable one. The two of them glared at each other. In any case, they both thought the other was wrong. After glaring at her for a while, she was the first to give in. He gently pulled her sleeve and said softly, Fine, if you say so, then so be it. Do you understand now? Umph. He smiled fawningly and moved forward to hug her, but he was slapped away. Then, he unyieldingly pulled her arm again. I'm an idiot, and you're an idiot with me. In short, we're two idiots. Isn't this fair? Oh, if you don't say anything, I'll take it that you're not angry anymore. I'm not an idiot. Fine, you're not. But we've wasted a lot of time. From now on, let's not waste any more, okay? If you don't say anything, I'll take it that you agree. I didn't. He swallowed the rest of his words, so he smiled cheerfully. You really agreed. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.